Jeff Nelson here. Thanks for tuning in. Today I've got a favorite guest back, our resident genius, Dr. Peter Rogers. Welcome, Dr. Rogers.
Hey.
Dr. Rogers is here not to talk about diet or health or medicine or doctoring, but about motivation, about getting stuff done. And what happens is, one of the things that I do is help people write books. Someone has a book, they could probably get a book deal. Maybe they're famous, their book could get an advance, but they don't want to write that book. They're too busy, it's not their thing, they need help, and that's where I come in. Or I meet someone and I realize, hey, you need a book, you could sell a book, I'll write it for you. And I've written a number of books like this, and in fact, I'm working on one right now. It's a memoir for someone who's had a very interesting life. And so this person and I got together for several meetings, and I wrote a proposal, which is an outline and 2 or 3 sample chapters. And usually that's enough to sell a book to a publisher in order to get an advance. And then you actually write the book after you get the deal. But the proposal that I did for this, it just wasn't working, and my agent was skeptical. So because I believe in this guy and think he's got a great story, I said, look, we need to write the book. We need the whole book. Once we do that, we know we can sell it, that they'll get it when they see the full thing. So this can be a long process, and it stretched longer because the person who I'm writing this for, he kept remembering things whenever I finished a chapter. So, he would recall a whole lot of stuff later. And of course, I'd want to go rewrite that chapter. And then his wife remembered things and told him things that he didn't remember. And then I interviewed his son and his business partner, and they had all kinds of stuff that he had never, whole parts of his life that he hadn't included in my interviews with him, or that he thought was too much, or he was embarrassed to talk about, but they turned out to be some of the best parts of the story. So by the time I'd done all these interviews, and they're all recorded and they're transcribed using AI, it had become a pretty big job. And I was working on it bit by bit here and there. It seemed kind of daunting. Then one day I was watching Dr. Rogers' channel, and he was talking about how he writes so many books, and he's written a number of them. He seems to just, crank them out like he cranks out his great YouTube videos on his channel. And I'll link to his channel below so you can go subscribe. But Dr. Rogers talks about a sort of tunnel focus, a tunnel vision almost, where he puts just about everything in his life on hold in order to push and create whatever book project he's working on. He goes on a sort of a forced hibernation for a period of weeks. And I thought, that's interesting. Maybe that's what I need to do, is just turn this book project into basically the only thing I'm going to do for the next 6 weeks, stop everything else that I would normally do. Long story short, following some of Dr. Rogers' ideas, I did that, and the book is almost done and soon to be moving forward to publishers. And I even asked my wonderful guest today, Pete Rogers, if he would read the initial draft, which I appreciated, and he gave us a lot of great input and suggestions. So for those who don't know my guest today, Dr. Peter Rogers is a medical doctor who was educated at Stanford, Northwestern, Harvard. The guy was #1 in his class. He got 99% board scores every time he took them. He's got an impressive background. Check out my other videos with him about the immune system, dementia. There's one called Medical Mayhem. But Dr. Rogers is also someone who's made a study of optimizing performance, of optimizing study habits, improving your grades, writing, public speaking, and developing the discipline and the habits that you need in order to get things done. So today we're going to talk about writing and about motivation and focus. Dr. Rogers, with that, are you ready to get the show started?
Yeah.
Well, then why don't we do it? Why don't you share your screen and away we go?
Okay, so the first slide is the cover of a book called Tristram Shandy by Lawrence Stern. And the funny thing about this book was it's an autobiography, so to speak, of Lawrence Stern indirectly, but it all starts from before he was born. And most of the book is about before he was born. So I found that rather funny. Okay, in addition, Arthur Schopenhauer was this great genius, him and Goethe, the 2 greatest geniuses Germany ever produced. And he said, in the best books, he says, almost nothing happens. He says, it's not exteriority that we want, action and all that. What we want is interiority, the thoughts of the characters. Okay. And that's what that book is great about. And that's a great thing to remember for writing. Okay. So as Tristram Shandy started from before he's born, I'm going to show you before I was born briefly. This is my father. He is a wonderful guy from Ireland, a physician. He was a boxer. Family was very poor, grew up in a house with a dirt floor. and he was a boxing champion, valedictorian, and he was a hardworking guy. So growing up, all I saw was my old man working his tail off. Every day, he's up early in the morning, works all day. In the afternoon, he takes the dog for a walk, and then he listens to classical music and he reads, okay? And he got me to read because I wanted to be like my father. By the way, these priests are the biggest priests I've ever seen in the history of the world. They're a bunch of giants. My parents are normal-sized people, okay? These are the biggest priests in the world I've ever seen. Okay, so anyways, this is my mother, and my mother is a saint. The best person I ever met in my whole life was my mother. And my father sort of taught me the intellectual side of life, be a hard worker, read a lot, and made me want to be an athlete. He was a boxing champion. He quit boxing in college because he knew he'd end up with brain damage. But, he was a tough guy and he was real scholarly. So I was, student athlete of the year at Stanford University as a wrestler. I wanted to be a tough guy and a scholar like my father. Okay, I admired him very much. He's one of my heroes growing up. My mother, when I was young, I kind of thought she was stupid. She never read a book. All right. But what I noticed as I got older is my mom made everything work. She didn't have to work after she had the kids, and she just made everything work in the family. And I learned with time, when I had a question about a social issue, I would maybe run it by my dad, but my mom would give me better advice. Socially, she was like a genius. She just knew what was right. And like I said, she was like a saint. She adopted all these girls that when their families were having problems, anybody who had a problem, my mom would let them live at our house, 1, 5, 10 years even, and she would take care of them. I had an aunt who was an alcoholic. My mom would bring her into the house and detox her. It was amazing the things she did. Okay, here's me in high school. The reason I'm giving you this backstory about my childhood is it's going to relate to all my motivation in psychology. I was a really good wrestler. I was just a strong guy, okay? My family were just strong. My grandfather was like 9 times national champion in bicycles in Ireland. My mom was a really good athlete, doubles champion of tennis. So, this is me wrestling in high school. I was 39-1 my junior year. I really should have won state. I was pissed off. I'm crying here because I took 3rd in state rather than 1st in state. But I had unlimited potential because I hadn't really had coaching yet. I just physically had athletic ability, and Illinois is a good wrestling state. When I in schoolboy states, I pinned my way through the whole tournament in first period. Okay, so anyways, then I got injured. And this is my brother, by the way. And just to give you an example from the background I come back, he's state champion, freestyle, Greco-Roman. He's currently a world champion athlete. So I was around a lot of intense competitive people. And by the way, he's even better looking in real life. My other brother's better looking than him. I would never let a girlfriend see my brothers because I'd seen it happen. As soon as a girl would see my brother, she'd go, "Oh my God, your brother is gorgeous." And they would all fall in love with my brother. So if I really liked a girl, I would never let her see my brother unless I had slept with her first and she was committed to me. Because otherwise, any girl who saw my brothers would fall in love with them. And I had a girlfriend in high school who I was absolutely in love with. Some of the happiest days of my life ever. It was like perfect. When you're young, you live with your parents. They're paying all the bills. They're doing all the work, so you got time to be in love and have fun, splendor in the grass and all that. Okay, later on, her mother was very sick. And I didn't know what to do. I'll tell you about that later. But anyways, that was love. And I loved the music. She was a classical musician, like top notch, like among the best. Okay. And I just loved being around all that. And she nurtured in me this love of classical music. I had gotten it from my parents. My parents were always playing classical music and Irish music, like John McCormick, the great Irish tenor. He's still the best Irish tenor, the best tenor that ever lived. I think he's better than Pavarotti. Pavarotti's a little more beautiful, his voice, but McCormick is more pleasant, his voice. John McCormick. Check out his song, Kathleen Mavoureen, okay? All right, and here's Ludwig Beighton. He said, music is the language of God. So that is one perspective, that music is the language of God, universally applicable to all mankind. And there's some truth in that. And I had a deep sense of that. And that reminds me of my mother too, this personal, emotional sense that's present in music, but it's not really that easy to classify and specify with logic or numbers or anything. But it's true. Okay. And then here's me, when I was a wrestler at Stanford, and I was just a strong guy and I had a lot of potential, but I had injured my clavicle. I fractured it. And I kept coming back too soon and refracturing it. So my athletic career kind of went downhill. Stanford still offered me a scholarship. The Big Ten schools recruited me, but would no longer offer me a scholarship. And my getting repeat injuries, it messed up my career. And I was very sad. I would cry. I would just be sitting there and I would start crying because I blamed it on myself. I was like, "You stupid idiot. God gave you a chance to be a great athlete. You were so happy, you had so much fun, and you ruined it because you're an idiot. You're a moron. You kept coming back too soon. You ruined your own life, you stupid idiot. You'll never be happy again." So I was really mad at myself, okay? And I just want to show you, too, like what my status was. So when I was in high school, being a high school athlete is really high status. It's about as high as it gets, all right? And that's the experience I had, when I was a high school wrestler. Then I go to Stanford, and at Stanford, they don't really like wrestlers. It's California. They're like, why do you want to wrestle? And then there would be articles in the newspaper. Why do we give scholarships to football players and wrestlers? They're just a bunch of thugs. So it was like I went from really high social status to like zero. I didn't know a single person over there. I drifted apart from my girlfriend. I was very sad about all that. I was frightened because I'm naturally kind of smart, but not that smart. My parents were fuzzy foreigners. I didn't know anything about America. They didn't know anything about America. I never took an honors class in high school. Get alone an AP class. I go to Stanford, there's all these kids. I've already completed the first year, they got all these AP credits and stuff. So I was really, sort of out of it. I'll explain some more of that. And then things got a little better later, but not that different. So here's me as a freshman at Stanford. And basically, I was the loneliest guy in the world. I had a calendar on the wall, hoping to go back home and see my girlfriend for Christmas or next summer. Just counting the days. I was having a tough time in school because I hadn't ever been in a competitive academic environment before. And so then my girlfriend called me, said, would it be okay for her to go to homecoming with some other guys? She promises not to do anything with them. I got re-injured in the beginning of my first year, and the coach is like, maybe we should have you give up your scholarship. He's pissed off you wasted the money on me. So I was really at a low point, and I was very sad. And I talked to my mother. I was closest with my mother of anybody in the world. And I told my mom what was happening. She said, I told her, I hate this place at Stanford. I'm lonely as anything. I'm miserable. I want to come home. And she said, no, just give it 1 year. She said, God doesn't want you to be a wrestler. He wants you to become a scientist or a doctor. You're going to become a great scientist or doctor. Just try for 1 year. And I love my mother, and I knew she always meant the best for me, and she was very reasonable. So I said, you know what, Mom? I'll give it a try for 1 year. I'm going to take all my sadness, frustration, anger, loneliness, and take that energy and put it into becoming the best student. I'm going to become like a learning machine. Okay, so I said, I made a vow. I am going to go for it. And I was so mad at myself. And I said, you know what, God, you ruined my career. I'm not happy about it as an athlete, but I see that I maybe have a chance, maybe, to do something academically, intellectually, and I want to do something. It's kind of inspiring. You're at Stanford, there's all these people, they show all the professors' publications in Scientific American and stuff. And so to be a scholar was very prestigious over there. And I kind of had this childish notion, maybe if I become a great scholar, great scientist, doctor, or something, my life will get better again, because my life was awful. It was terrible. It wasn't like I was just lonely this weekend. It was this weekend, and there was no hope of it ever getting better. There's like at Stanford too, they say 9 out of 10 California girls are pretty, and the 10th one goes to Stanford. That's what it was like. And the few girls that are half decent looking, they got a million guys all over them. They tend to recruit student athlete type guys. So in the attractiveness basis, the men are up here compared to the women at Stanford. And I had zero chance I never had a girlfriend in 4 years at Stanford. Okay. Just in 4 years. All right. And I was captain of the wrestling team, student athlete of the year. I set records in my sport. Okay. So anyways, when I was talking to my mother, I said, I'm going to become a learning machine. I looked out the window and I saw vomit on the ground on the sidewalk. I was up on the second floor in the dorm. And I thought to myself, good, because a lot of these kids came from spoiled backgrounds, really tightly watched by their parents and stuff. Whereas, my parents kind of like, we had a bunch of kids and they didn't keep track of me that close. So anyways, I was like, good, go ahead, get drunk, go to all your parties, go ahead, go to your families on the weekends. But you're smarter than me. You're better educated than me, but it doesn't matter. While you're goofing off, I'm going to be studying and I'm going to catch you. I would study until I was ready to drop out of my chair. I was so motivated. I'd get out of my chair in the morning. I would study. I mean, I was like, I screwed up my athletic career. I was so mad at myself. I was crying about that. Whenever no one was around, I would just start crying on my own. And I said, I am not going to screw up my academic career. I am going to push myself till I drop. I knew I could push myself. I was a mentally tough guy, but I didn't know what was going to happen, but I'm just telling you, nothing would get in my way that I'm going to work. I was just total workaholic. And these are some people that inspired me and helped me understand what I was going through psychologically. This is Alfred Adler. He was a psychiatrist, physician. He was actually a protege of Freud originally. And he came to the conclusion of what is called the inferiority principle. A man feels inferior about something, and because of that, he overcompensates in another area to try to make up for it. And that was totally true. I went from, guys I knew in high school, I kicked the crap out of them on the wrestling mat. They were now all Americans, and I was still recovering from my injury. Okay. And so I took that frustration in sport and put it into academics. And it gave me incredible energy because I was so pissed off that I had screwed up my athletic career. I was not going to screw up my academic career. Nothing could stop me from that because that was the most important thing in the world to me at that time. Okay, and the other guy I really like is the theory of positive personality disintegration reintegration, Kazimir Dobronsky. Okay, and basically what he said is sort of what I just said. He says you can let a setback, a disappointment, a failure crush you and make you give up, or you can take that energy and frustration and re-put it into something else. So I had that in my mind. I'm going to put it into academics. Okay, so instead of just whining like a baby about my sadness about not being the great athlete anymore, I'm going to become great in academics, and I'm going to figure out what it was. I initially thought I was going to be a wildlife biologist. And I also learned something, too. There was a guy who had gotten A pluses in some of the classes, and I was lucky enough to know him a little bit. And I asked him, what are you doing? Because I was afraid I was going to flunk out. Can I hang around with you? Can I see how you study and stuff? And so I hung around with this guy, and what I sensed was he loved academics. He loved biology. Most kids were trying to take biology, try to get a decent grade so they can get into med school. Okay. He loved biology. He wanted to be a biologist. So I'd hang around him. We go bird watching. He had a friend who was a professor, not at Stanford, but a previous Stanford professor. And he would teach us about bird watching. We're talking about ecology. And I began to feel I'm gaining an advantage on people. And what I mean by that is other kids are just studying for the test and they would forget everything. We wanted to be biologists. We're having conversations about the birds, about the plants, about the ecological systems, about the pollution in the water. And I've come to realize this is one of the great secrets of excellence, of learning, but in other areas as well. And Goethe, the great German writer, like the Shakespeare of Germany, he said, in order for a man to learn a complex topic, he must love it. And he wrote a book called The Sorrows of Young Werther. So young Werther was this guy who was in love with this girl named Charlotte, but she was really probably planning on marrying this other guy who was just away for a year or two. But he would talk with her, and he would then write letters to his friend Wilhelm. This was written in about 1800 by Goethe. And he would say, oh, I love the way she walks. I love the way she talks, the way she interacts with her siblings, the way she dresses, the sound of her voice. She's so wonderful. Okay, and so here's what I'm saying is, if a person could fall in love with biology or nutrition or any other subject in the same way that he loved Charlotte, you would be great at it. Because most students, all they do is try to get a good grade, highlight their notes, and memorize their notes. Okay, but if you got that inner love of wanting to be really good, wanting to know the field, planning to use it in your life, not just take a test, the material stays with you longer, you remember it at a deeper level, and you just get better. So the more time went by, I started out beneath all the students, but I was going up and up, and they were kind of barely going up compared to me. And so I began to dominate. My second year, I get A pluses in the hardest classes. I'd walk in the room, I know I was the best student in the room. I could tell by everybody else having conversations that I had a deeper understanding of the material. And that's a big part of where it comes from. It also came from the idea of learning study skills. I started to read all these books on study skills because I wanted to improve my ability. The other thing, too, I've noticed is I've had some professors tell me and friends is that people who exercise a lot, it makes you smarter. You get mitochondrial biogenesis, not just in your muscles to increase the number of mitochondria, to increase the glycogen storage in your muscles. You get increased mitochondria in your brain and in your astrocytes store more glycogen. They're sort of the supporting cells of the neurons. And so what I'm saying is I was always wrestling, studying, and it sort of made me really good at school. And I think that helps other student athletes. I've had plenty of professors tell me they're student athlete types. They don't have to be on a varsity team, but just that they exercise a lot, that fitness goes with being a scholar. It really does. This is Beethoven taking a walk. And I read about all the geniuses. I wanted to become a genius, so I started studying all the geniuses and what are their daily habits, what do they do? And walking a lot was very common. Beethoven, Nietzsche, Emerson, Jefferson, a bunch of other ones. Okay, so anyways, and I also noticed, again, like Amadeus, this is one of my favorite movies of all time, is Amadeus, and there's Mozart, okay? And what did Mozart say? He says, love, 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 that is the source of genius. So you got to try to find something you really like, because if you really like it, then you start to study it from all different perspectives and get the nuance of it, and you become a lot better. And it propels you beyond, the common average attitude towards the subject, because, you see it from all sides. I'll read in all sides about something. I'll read about all the unconventional, conventional opinions. And then once I've got that, I'm more able to take a bird's eye view, kind of like the six blind men in the elephant proverb of India. One guy holds the tail, says it's a rope. Another guy holds the ear, says it's a rug. Another guy touches the side of the elephant, says it's a wall. But the bird's eye view is to be up above, can see the six blind men and say, oh, it's an elephant. So that's where you want to get on mastering a subject. Okay. And I just want to just share with you the type of personality that it comes from. So another place we went to the Palo Alto Baylands, and this goes on for quite some distance, and you can see all the birds there. So we would walk around, me and my bird watching friends, watching all the birds and observing the birds, and that we really learned a lot of ecology. If you look at like Watson and Crick, he wrote the DNA Helix book, and he said that that's how he became in love with biology. And that's a common way, because to go bird watching, I'd recommend if you have a young person, you want them to like biology, take them bird watching. You're out there having conversations, the type of stuff they would say. Blue jays are the assholes of the bird world. Watch this blue jay. And we would watch the blue jay, and the blue jay would do all these asinine things, and it was funny. And you develop this sense of being with nature and understanding it. So just to give you a sense too, like my brain, where I was at, I'm a little sophomore in Stanford, and we go bird watching to the Palo Alto Baylands. I really liked it. I went back by myself because I was trying to understand things about the bird biology in the Baylands. And I go up to the counter where they have a help desk in this little nature facility. I said, "Can I please see your field guide?" And they go, "Oh, we don't have a field guide." I looked at them like, "Are you guys out of your friggin' mind? You don't have a field guide? All these birds, you don't have a field guide?" So I went and I took all the other field guides and I wrote my own field guide for the thing. And so what I'm trying to say is I was super busy, competing as a varsity wrestler. I started on the varsity team in wrestling. I was taking really difficult classes, but it was so personally important to me in my heart that the Palo Alto Baylands must have a field guide that I just wrote one on my own and I gave it to them for free. And I'm letting you know that mentality, it doesn't give you 5 cents, but that mentality leads to good things. And that was the mentality I had. Another guy who I really liked was Maxwell Maltz. Maxwell Maltz wrote the book Psychocybernetics. He's a plastic surgeon, and it came out of him seeing his patients. You could have two patients that seemed on the surface of it exactly the same, but one of them would have a fantastic outcome, and the other one would have a lousy outcome. They'd have the dwindles, they'd sit around in the hospital, have complications, their healing would be slow, and he'd be like, "What's going on?" And he noticed that a sense of the self-image was tremendously important. If the patient said, "Okay, thank you for helping me get over my medical problem. I've got to get home to take care of my kids or to do my job," or whatever it might be, those patients would have great outcomes. So, and the relevance is all these athletes, these national champions, they were reading Maxwell Maltz's book, Psychocybernetics. I'll show you a picture of it. Here it is, Psychocybernetics. And it's how do you psych yourself up so that you can achieve more. You build yourself up. And it kind of reminds me of a Goethe quote. In order for a man to achieve all that he's capable of, he must think he is better than he actually is at the moment. And you should also give people the benefit of the doubt, because that's how you grow and you build. So it reminds me also of a more recent book called Mindset or Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck. She's a psychologist at Stanford. And this book wasn't even written yet. And I didn't ever heard of her growth mindset concept, but that's what I had. And that's what I've seen a lot of people who really developed well had in their mind. The idea that, why not me? Why can't I be the best? I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go for it. The idea that if I make the effort, I could improve. You have to believe that. Because, for example, as far as intelligence, a lot of people think, well, you're either smart or you're not. You're either a good student or you're not. There's not much you could do about it. All these college professors are a bunch of BS ignoramuses. Don't even know what they're talking about. They tell people you can't increase IQ. That is completely untrue. It is very easy to increase IQ. IQ as defined as academic ability to perform in school. It's real easy. What you do is you look at the individual components. I will increase my ability to prepare for class. I'll read the night before, okay? I'll increase my ability to comprehend the class. I'll sit in the front row. I mean, there's lots of things you can do, and all of a sudden your academic performance will increase. And you can try applying that to other things. But what I'm trying to say is you want that mindset of, what could I do? Maybe I could succeed. Maybe I could be the best. Why not me? I see my other friends, all Americans, athletes, national champions in sport. This guy now, I told you he's getting A+ in school. Why can't I get an A+? So I copied him and I tried to add anything I could. I read through the study skills books. I tested out a bunch of methods. That's how you get better. Okay, so that's how I became great at school. And I was student athlete here at Stanford. I started getting A+ in the most difficult classes. And then here is what I learned about sports. This is Mark Schultz. He was a 3-time NCAA champion at Oklahoma. And here he is wrestling Ed Bannock, who was a 2-time NCAA champ at the time of this match. This is the finals of the NCAAs. And everybody thought Bannock was going to win. Everybody thought Bannock was going to be a 4-time national champion. And Mark Schultz beat him. It was a great match. I think it's the greatest match of all time in wrestling. It was incredible. The NCAA finals. You can still watch that if you go to YouTube. Type in Mark Schultz versus Ed Bannock. It's an awesome match. Well, anyways, I got to have the Schultz brothers as coaches at Stanford. And they did a lot of things that were very unorthodox. He, for example, wouldn't speak to anybody for at least a week, sometimes 2 weeks before a big competition. It was weird. He'd wear sunglasses and he wouldn't talk. And it's weird, but he said he was building up psychological energy. And I saw it. When he came out on the mat, he was like Superman. Okay, and he was a gymnast too. He had this, he was like a gyroscope, his technique. And if I had to do it over again, I would have learned more gymnastics because he could get out of all kinds of bizarre situations with that. Okay, the other guy to learn about is Dave Schultz. Dave Schultz, I think I got another picture of him here. Here's me as Mark Schultz. He was the guy, he hurt his foot at this moment, but he helped me a lot too. The head coach, when he was giving me a hard time, going to take away my scholarship, I was ready to quit. I even told a friend of mine on the team I'm maybe going to quit. He told Mark Schultz. Mark Schultz comes to me, he goes, Rogers, there's nothing wrong with you. You need to hang around with me. And so he got me to live with the other wrestlers, and I just hung around with him for a couple months. And he started telling me all these stories about wrestling the Russians, about Gene Mills. Gene Mills was one of his buddies on the wrestling team, an awesome wrestler. And everybody thought he's going to get crushed by the Russian who was world champion, Shagayev. And Mills says, I'm going to kick the shit out of Shagayev. And anyways, Mills did. Okay. And he told me all these stories, and it's kind of like, well, gee, these guys are world champions. Why can't I be better? And so after I hung around with him, I went from being ready to quit the team to came back and set the all-time record of victories in a season, team captain and stuff. Here's the other coach, Mark Schultz. Good to know about him because I learned a very valuable strategy from him that I use for all kinds of things. It's called the strategy of incrementalism. Incrementalism means that you can take, let's say you want to build a skill in a certain area. You can take 20 little things, 30 little things. Each one by itself seems insignificant, but they all build a little bit your general ability. He was a fat kid when he was young. His nickname was Pudge. He was dyslexic, and people would make fun of him. They go, hey, you fat retard, you suck, Schultz, things like that. And he went to the wrestling team and he liked it. He sort of enjoyed the creativity of learning the moves, and he became addicted to wrestling. He would stay after practice for hours, drive his coach crazy. How do I do this? How do I do this? How do I do this for technique? By the time he's in junior high, he would practice with the junior high team. Then he would go to the high school team's practice. Then he would ride his bike over to the Stanford team because he lived in Palo Alto. So there's, his junior high, there's Pali High, and there's Stanford. And so he was training at a college level in 8th grade. When he was a senior in high school, he wrestled in the Open National Tournament against Chuck Yagla, two-time defending national champion from the NCAA's college, Iowa. Caught him in a throw and pinned him. It's like, holy crap. He was the best wrestler ever in the history of the high school in the whole United States. He's kind of like what Bruce Lee is to martial arts. That's what he was to wrestling. And what I'm trying to say is we went for wrestling practice our first week, okay, and we have to run sprints as a team up the hills in the Palo Alto hills there, the Bay Hills. And he was slow. We go in the weight room, lift weights. He was weak. And it was his off season. He's fat. I'm like, this guy's fat, weak, and slow. How did he become the best in the world? I really didn't understand it. And then what I saw was, if I'd ask him technique, like let's say I ask a regular college coach, how do you finish a single leg from the feet? They'll tell you, well, you can do a dump, you can switch off to a double leg, you can treetop it, okay? Schultz, he would go on and on. He'd tell you 25 different things, then the counter to the counter to the counter to the counter to the counter. And he was just able to think his way into his opponent's head and always have a counter to whatever they do. So it's almost like he could read their mind as an athlete. And that's why he was so great. And so, I was scared of him my first 2 years because he's working with the seniors and stuff. But then I'm like, hey, could you help me out? I want to try to get better. And I wrestled all summer. I instead of going home to my girlfriend, I just competed in the summer tournaments all summer. And that's also how I got a lot better. But the idea of incrementalism is you can only get about 5-10% stronger, better endurance than the other top-notch guys. There's a lot of guys really strong, really fit, but you could be 100, 1,000 times better than them, exponentially better than them in technique. So that's your ticket to greatness. If you want to become great as a wrestler, is to become a master of technique. You can overcome a lot of physical weaknesses by doing it, and that's what he did. It was kind of awesome. So I actually tried to apply that to academics and later to other forms of scholarship. What's the best I can do for note-taking? What's the best I can do for memorization techniques? What's the best I can do to optimize my performance for a test? All kinds of things. And I read everything you could read about memorization techniques, about study fields. Here, I just want to show you some of my stuff just so you know I'm not BSing you. Here's the Stanford wrestling team records, and here's my name, Peter Rogers, and I set the all-time record for victories as of my senior year, like 1986. Later on, some guys came along, they had more matches, and they were able to win more, but up until the time I had competed, that was the most anybody had ever won in a season at Stanford. Okay. Then another thing that had an effect on me was, my life at Stanford was very lonely. I didn't I didn't have almost like any social life. There were no parties. There's no bars on campus. It's like its nickname at Stanford is the barn. You're out in a field, okay? It sucks. Everybody says, "Oh, I'd love to go to Stanford." Yeah, right. Why don't you go there? It was like the worst social life. And later on, I lived with all these athletes, and you had guys who were going to be pro football players and stuff, and they didn't have a girlfriend. Okay, I never seen anything like it. You go to some state school, and a guy who's a varsity starter, they have their pick of girlfriends. Okay, but at Stanford, nope. It was weird, but it was low status. So anyways, the reason I'm going through all that was all I was doing was studying and wrestling, and pretty intensely. And so I really didn't socialize much. When you're in high school, there's a party every weekend. You meet a new girl. And, I was with my girlfriend for years. I was in love with that girl. I still kind of am. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is this lack of social interaction, other than hanging around with wrestlers or scholars who I would talk to, made me a little bit socially awkward. And so I would come home. And so, like, let's say this is my brother. My brother would make fun of me. He goes, "Hey, Rain Man, you know what to do. First you say hello, then you say, how you doing? So they would tease me. And so I learned pretty fast. Nobody cares talking about technical things, scientific things. Nobody cares what book I read last weekend. This was before the internet was a big thing. Okay, so I started to do things, I think, that helped me a lot later in life. Initially, I wrote everything by hand in a book. Later on, I made a Word file on the computer of all the jokes. I would collect all the jokes. I would watch Rodney Dangerfield, for example. I love Rodney Dangerfield, Sam Kinison, Eddie Murphy. I would memorize their entire routine, and I could repeat it all back and like make my friends laugh. Okay, so people would like it when I would tell jokes. Nowadays, everybody gets their underwear in a bunch if you make a joke. Okay, people think they're more moral. They're actually less moral. But anyways, that was part of my improving my social skills, and it later, I think, helped me a lot as a writer and a speaker, that I got thousands of jokes, okay? And I also collected all the quotes. I collected all the quotes of the great writers, okay? Because in the back of my mind, I somehow thought maybe someday I'll want to be a writer. I kind of like that at Stanford. So that's another thing I think that was one of my strengths, is I have a big file of quotes. I have literally 5,000 pages of quotes. So I can remember quotes from and I studied all the geniuses. I studied all the philosophers, et cetera, et cetera. So I have all that. And I think the reason I'm sharing this with you is I'm saying, if you want to be a good writer, if you want to be a good comedian, a good entertainer, a good public speaker, you should have some material that you can call upon to help you in the appropriate situation. And in a sense, what I was sort of doing was the idea like the Feynman method. He would take a subject. Let's say he wants to learn physics, okay? He would just write down everything about physics, keep this big Word file on the subject, and just keep on collecting and amassing the data and then recategorizing it to keep it all well organized. And that's how you become an expert on a subject. That's one of the things you do. And also later on, if I really wanted to learn something, I would often write a book about it because I'd be all excited about it. In a sense, my Feynman method notes, well organized, became a book, okay? And that later on led to my books, because I would keep a file on things. Like, I'm interested in diabetes. So I keep track of all the papers on diabetes and interesting lectures on it, and then go, yep, time to write a book on diabetes. And I would crank it all out. So having those resources of a lot of accumulated information allows you to quickly, when the time comes, to mix and match and put it all together. And secretly, like, where was this all coming from, too? I didn't know that much when I was a young guy about what the future and the destiny was going to hold, but I had this idea. I want my life to be like it was in high school. I want to, have friends around me. I want to have a woman I love around me. And, maybe if I just keep on improving myself, things will get better. What I really didn't understand at that time is the most important thing for finding a woman you like is being around a bunch of women, okay? If you're at Stanford sitting in your dorm room, you're not going to meet any women, okay? If you're at Stanford in general, you're not going to meet any women, all right? If you're, I went to med school, my med school, I didn't even think about it. My med school was in like a ghetto. There were zero social events. It was like being at Stanford still. No social events, none, zero. There's never going to be anything socially. You can't, polish a turd, okay? That's the wrong place to be if you want to have a good social life. Okay, so anyways, but I'm giving you, that's the psychology of it. And I later on learned, man, you want to be a good speaker or writer, I think you should be watching the great comedians because they're great at it. They walk around because the eye pays attention to motion. It makes them entertaining. Look at the way they change their voice tone. They make voices and stuff. They're a lot of fun, okay? They were great. I think Sam Kinison's the funniest guy who ever lived. And Eddie Murphy was awesome. His old comic routines, Raw and Delirious and all that stuff. We loved all that stuff. I actually think the 1980s were maybe the high point of the United States. The country was rich. The movies were great. The comedies were great. The music was great, etc. Okay, so here's my picture from medical school. I graduated first in my class, 99% on boards. Oh, I'll tell you what also happened in my first midterm. I was like 10th percentile in the class, my first midterm. And it was like, I felt like somebody had mugged me in an alley. 10th percentile? Are you out of your freaking mind? After how hard I worked, I've given up my whole life to be 10th percentile? Are you kidding me? I felt like literally somebody had beaten me up in the alley. I was so pissed off, upset, and mad, and I didn't understand what had happened. But then I'm sitting in the cafeteria like 2 weeks later, and I hear these two girls talking. Well, my senior year of high school, I took histology and anatomy and physiology. I'm like, they had all the classes before. I'm sitting there counting the number of mitochondria in a bug's ass over at Stanford, all this fancy research stuff, while they were taking the basic first year of medical school already. So they had an advantage on me. Once I realized that, I just studied a little more, and I moved ahead of them. But at the time, I was freaked out by that. I wrote 2 books in medical school, Medical Students Guide to Top Board Scores. I wrote Quick Medical Spanish. There's a picture of me and my mom. We made a recording of it, an audio tape. My background, too, coming from Puerto Rico. This is my great-grandfather in Puerto Rico. He was known, according to the family, as the smartest man in Puerto Rico. He was a merchant marine, and they said he could add up a column of numbers like this, and he also was just a brilliant guy. He could speak 6 languages, all right? So anyways, I tell you that because he apparently had a family on another island, and when her mother found out that he had another family, she went apeshit bananas and started hitting them and beating them with a stick, and then he just left, and he never came back. And she actually hates him because he abandoned the family and they were dirt poor. I saw my mother's home. She also grew up on a dirt floor. She had to sleep in a barn, her whole family, at a relative's house because they were so poor they had nowhere to live or go. And she had to work minimum wage jobs when she was young. But her family is super smart. This is some of my family in Puerto Rico. They're super smart. Okay. She got a master's degree from University of Chicago. She got a couple of brothers and sisters, MDs, PhDs, and all this stuff, despite the fact they didn't have a dime. Okay. I learned a lot from my mother. So I initially became a surgeon. I was an imaging guided surgeon. And I offered this textbook. This is Elsevier Amersys. It's the best, radiology, imaging guided surgery publishing company in the world. And they asked me to publish their book. So I wrote the Pocket Radiology Interventional Technique, Top 100 Procedures. It was a real popular, well-liked book, got translated in other languages, including Spanish and stuff. So I'm letting you know that's where I came from as a young guy. And I did my fellowship in Harvard, imaging guided surgery, also called interventional radiology. And this is me at a course where we're learning how to do different techniques. It's an animal surgery course. All right. So then I got married. And I'm kind of joking here. I learned a lesson with marriage. Fiance's motto is anything you want, honey. After marriage, it becomes she's in charge. All right. So a couple of marriage jokes there. We're not going to go into any. So actually, which one I'll go into? I'll go into Rodney Dangerfield. Rodney Dangerfield said, what's the difference between having an arranged marriage versus marrying for love? You can spend the rest of your life blaming your parents instead of yourself. So anyways, I learned what marriage is like. And I was actually super happy. The first couple of years of marriage were great. Having the kids. That was a big adventure and fun. Then another turning point in my life was I changed from being a surgeon, imaging guided surgeon, to being a neuroradiologist primarily. And it was a mixed bag. What I liked about being an imaging guided surgeon was you walk around all the time, meet lots of people. It's fun doing procedures, doing surgery. So I liked all of that. And you're a real clinical doctor. I wrote all the admitting orders and stuff on my patients and followed them, had my clinic and all this stuff. I liked all of that. But what I didn't like was there's a power system in medicine that the public doesn't really know about. And the power system basically says, where's our money? Okay. And so what they want you to do is constantly give them more money, give them more money. The patients are irrelevant. Nobody cares about patients. Patients are basically, the attitude of the medical system is they're a bunch of poor, stupid people. We give them the standard of care and that's it. Okay. And so I would want to innovate. I wanted, for example, I would want all these new techniques I had developed. I read all the journal articles and they're like, no, we don't need all this new bullshit. We're not going to get paid for it. Forget it. Okay. And then I also ran into the situation where, somebody's dying. Let's say Mr. Jones is dying. Okay. And I know that I have nothing to offer Mr. Jones. But then what would happen is other services would tell me, we need you to do this procedure. And I go, well, that's a bullshit procedure. It's not going to help the patient. They go, look, we need you to do this procedure. The family expects it. I go, it has zero chance of helping this patient. And then they go, look, if you don't want to do the procedure, we're going to call your boss. So then they would call my boss or the boss's boss, and the boss would say, make them happy, do the procedure. And that would happen to me a lot. You think that's rare? That happens all the time. So I'm like, here I am, like I'm working at a fast food restaurant, having to do bullshit procedures that I know are bullshit because there's games being played. I did not like that. I did not like the fact that my judgment was very often overruled by I was ordered to do things I did not want to do or did not think was right. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to go to neuroradiology. I'd always liked neuroradiology. I've been fascinated by the brain. I'd read tons and tons of stuff about the brain with regard to learning, psychology of excellence, and memorization and all this stuff. And I had loved neuroradiology and neuroanatomy. So I'm like, you know what? I'm sick of this BS. I'm going into neuroradiology. Okay. And I was initially even going to be a brain surgeon. There's something called endovascular brain surgery. And I actually trained in it, but neurosurgery had taken it over. Okay, so I'm like, fine, I'll be a clinical diagnostic neuroradiologist. So I spent a lot of time talking about the brain every day. And I enjoy it. It's fascinating. And I actually think I was the perfect person to do it because I had all this background from extensive study of neurophysiology, neuroanatomy, and memorization techniques and psychology so that I could really have a big picture, comprehensive understanding of the brain as well as anybody in the world. Okay, and I got fat. I got fat in my early 30s because I was doing too much. I was doing 2 fellowships simultaneously. I wrote a book during my fellowship year, just had a baby at home with the wife. I'm up late with the baby. I was drinking 7 cups a day of Frappuccino mocha. And I'm like, holy crap, I'm fat. I'm like, well, I got good willpower. I'll just exercise more and eat less. But that doesn't work. For about 3 years, I couldn't quite do it. I'm like, holy crap, my whole family's making fun of me, fatso, and my wife laughed at me. You're going to be a diabetic. You're going to be impotent. That'll make my life easier. And I'm like, you know what? I can't let this happen. All right. And so, like a typical big joke, when I was taking my boards, I had to take this extra boards exam in neuroradiology, and it was in another state. I had to drive over there, and I remembered to bring all my food, but I forgot to bring my suit. It was an oral exam. So my brother, for example, said to me, he goes, what a pathetic fucking fat ass you are. He says, you remember your food, but you forget your suit. So that was a typical kind of mockery I was experiencing from my family. So anyways, I started reading about it, and I lost a lot of the weight, but I was hard time getting the last 25 pounds off. I got as fat as 220 pounds. My height is 5'9", so that's really fat for me. And then I started reading about Dr. McDougall's stuff and the starch-based diet. I exchanged emails with him, and I started to understand what the starch stuff was all about. And then I became a Star McDougall. So I was actually a Star McDougall, and I lost all the other weight. I got down to 154 pounds, which is a little bit skinny for me because I lift weights a lot. So, but I'm in a good side, and I've kept my weight normal. And that was many years ago, guys. I don't even know, many, many years ago when that all happened. Let's see here. So I decided, though, I'm going to become a nutrition expert because I saw that in clinical medicine, like when I was fat, I went around and talked with all my doctor buddies, and they really had nothing to offer me. Well, you might want to take a statin. You might want to take an aspirin. For hyperlipidemia, you could try this thing, to decrease absorption of fat. I'm like, oh, this is BS. And so I started reading nutrition literature. Patient with obesity cured, diabetes cured, hypertension cured, coronary artery disease cured, autoimmune disease cured. I'm like, holy crap, this never happens in conventional medicine, ever. It's all drug-based medicine. They never cure anybody of chronic disease. That's why it's called chronic, because no one's ever cured. So I saw this is the real power in health. And I started to go back through my biochemistry books, my molecular biology books, and they didn't really have the information from the nutritional books. Nobody could put it all together. You couldn't find the real information and put it all together anywhere. McDougall was correct. McDougall tells you what to do. McDougall gives you all the epidemiology, and McDougall is the foundation of it all. But I sensed that there was more to this field, and I was very interested in it. Okay, here was the house, too. So I actually bought a new house, and the new house, we had like a tennis court in the backyard, a tennis wall for hitting the tennis balls. And I partly designed how this house was set up and built and everything. And I love this house. Okay. My wife didn't really like it. It was my idea to move there. She was a little annoyed with the whole thing. The previous location was a little bit better for her. So she was kind of pissed off from the beginning. Put this net behind there so you hit the tennis balls. They don't go into the neighbor's yard. I love this place. It was great. I want to take a study break. I go outside. I shoot some baskets, hit some tennis balls. I love the place. My kids loved it. All their friends loved it. My family, everybody wanted to come to our house. Okay. And I'm not even showing you. There was a 40,000 gallon in-ground pool. There was a jungle gym for the kids to play on. There was an animal enclosure. The entire yard had this giant, big, high fence inside the house. So I converted one of the bedrooms to a racquetball court. I had a wrestling mat in the basement. I teach wrestling. I had a weightlifting room. We loved it. It was great. And then one day I come home from work. My kid's going into 7th grade, and he goes, Dad, you're a bad parent. I go, why do you tell me I'm a bad parent? And he goes, all you ever do is work. You don't help me. He said, other boys, my friend, his dad coaches the basketball team, and he's really good. Another boy, his dad teaches him and practices basketball with him. He's really good. And I'm not that good because I have no one to teach me or practice with me. And I'm like, and he goes, and you and Mom, all you guys do is work. Doctors are bad parents. I said, look, let me tell you something, buddy. Let me think about it. Maybe I can help you. So what I did was I took this living room. All we had a hardwood floor in there. We had a high ceiling. We were just using it for storage. We weren't using it for anything. And by the way, my wife's secret desire, like if you could summarize in one sentence what she really wanted out of life, she wanted to be like Martha Stewart. Okay. So the last thing in the world she wanted was, a jock and a half type husband who just wants to make the house into a jungle gym for exercise. Okay. But anyways, I said to myself, you know what? The wife's at work. I'll never ask her because she would block it. I had a friend who's a carpenter come over. We put these wood boards over the walls so the ball wouldn't break the wall. And I moved in a basketball court. So we had an indoor basketball court. The kids loved it. They loved it. All their friends came over. All the older ones are playing basketball. There's a circular drive around ring in the house. So the other younger kids are riding their tricycles around the house. It was the most popular house in the neighborhood. Everybody wanted to come over. But my wife was seething, okay? She was so pissed off. She goes, all that dribbling, you're driving me freaking nuts. She says, you are shaking the foundation. You are lowering the property value of this house. You're just an autistic, shithead. She was really mad at me. She went apeshit bananas. And she said, finally, she goes, that's it. She goes, I've had it. I'm going to buy a new house and you're either coming with me or you're not. So everybody loved it except my wife. And as far as I'm concerned, she ruined the whole thing. I was not happy about it. And eventually I moved with her because for the sake of the children, I know I've seen a lot of kids from divorced homes really end up all screwed up. I've seen kids commit suicide, drop out of school, become drug addicts. I've seen a lot of bad stuff from divorce. So I decided to stay with her. I went to the new house, even though I did not want to. Okay. And then the new house is really my wife's house. It's sort of like a prissy female house. There's not like great place to exercise. The backyard stinks. The house stinks. And so I'm like, oh man, this sucks. And so I was kind of sad about it, and I'll tell you what my son said to me. He goes, Dad, I can't believe you followed mom here. What, Dad, I've lost all respect for you. You're a pussy. That's what my son said to me. Okay. And I'm like, look, pal, the reason I'm here with you and your mother is for your sake, because you need me around more than you realize. Okay. So anyways, so I was a little sad about it for a while. Then I started saying to myself, you know what? It's my wife's house. At the old house, I used to cut the grass. I would manage the pool, pay all the bills. It took a lot of time to keep everything as it should be for the house. If there was a problem with the washer or the dryer, it was my problem. But now we're in a new house. It was her idea. It's her problem. So I'm like, gee, I used to be on call all the time, every single day as an imaging guided surgeon. I get called in the middle of the night. I have to go do emergency procedures, put in an IVC filter, you name it, all kinds of things, put in a kidney drainage tube, a nephrostomy, percutaneous nephrostomy, all kinds of stuff. And so I could never have a long block of time because I was constantly on call. And my little free time, I come home, I got to fix the pool, do a few things, pay some bills. And so I didn't have a lot of free time. But now I'm sitting in my wife's new house, and it's her house. She's got to manage all the property. I'm in neuroradiology. When I work a lot. But when I'm off, I'm off. And I sit around and I'm reading, okay? And I'm like, I started realizing things. The school sucked, My kids hated school. I hated school when I was young. Why? I loved reading and I loved talking to my father about books. I would sit with my dad and watch, he's from Ireland. And we would watch these channels on the BBC, Tests of the D'Urbervilles, all these movies, the Mayor of Casterbridge. And then my dad would read the book. I would read the book. And I, as a young guy, I didn't really understand the books. How can I understand the emotional stuff in Tests of the D'Urbervilles when I'm 12 years old? But the fact that I'm reading these books, I think it gave me a very good vocabulary. Like when I was in high school, I would do well on the spelling and stuff. But I would also get in trouble in school. When I was young, I was suspended. I was put into like 2 years of solitary confinement. And it's because I was smart. I could do the homework fast, and then I would want to make my friends laugh. So they put me in a pod classroom. If I was back in school these days, they would have drugged me, with attention deficit BS. They call me hyperactive and stuff. So anyways, what am I trying to say is when you tell a kid he has to memorize a bunch of vocabulary words for a test, and the kid knows and the teacher knows he's going to forget it as soon as the test is over, that's the equivalent of a punishment like Cool Hand Luke in the movie Cool Hand Luke with Paul Newman. They tell him, dig a ditch. And as soon as he digs a ditch and has all the dirt outside the ditch, they go, okay, now you've got dirt on my land. Put that dirt back in the ditch. So he has to you're wasting their time. It's an insult. When you really want to learn something, like you want to learn a technique in wrestling. Okay, here's how you hit an arm throw. You don't forget that. You remember that. You're going to need that arm throw later. It really matters. Versus memorizing a bunch of random, disconnected list of vocabulary words. That's BS, okay? The way you learn a word is in context. It's meaningful because it's part of a book or a story or something your friend said, not from random lists. The whole academic program in schools is very much of a joke. And think about it. How much does anybody remember from grade school and high school? About the only thing most people remember is how to type, okay? So anyways, what I'm getting at, why did I go through all that? Because I said, you know what? Somebody needs to write a book about study skills, teaching, and learning. So then I wrote these books, okay? I had a little bit of time. I go, you know what? It's time for me to write. And so I wrote Straight A at Stanford and on to Harvard. This is a shorter version for students. You know, I was like the best student in the whole United States in biochemistry when I was in medical school. That's the most difficult subject. And I had developed an insight, too, on learning because I'd seen the experience my kids were now having and what it was like teaching them to read and to adjust to school. This was a more bigger version, Straight A at Stanford and on to Harvard. This is the full version. This is the abridged version for younger students. And I would do all kinds of tricks. Like in my bathroom, I put this portable table next to the toilet. And I got the idea from Mozart. Mozart had written, I think it only fitting to write while shitting. He would write while he's on the toilet. And I'm like, well, gee, if I had a table in my bathroom, I could read while I was doing a number two. And I always keep a textbook there and I read tons of stuff that way. I put a paperback up here on this table and I got the idea from Monty Python's. It was from the skit, every sperm is sacred. And so I said, you know what? Every void could be sacred. I'm sitting there, you know, I might as well read at least. So I always train myself. I don't move out of this bathroom unless I've read at least a page in my paperback. And I'd often read more than that. And I started counting the times I go in the bathroom. I couldn't even believe it. I go in the bathroom a lot because you go in there to rinse your hands off, you know, for number ones, number twos, take a shower. You go in there more than you realize. And so I've got tons of reading. Every week now, I read at least one book. When I was taking my boards, I put all these pictures around the wall. These are pictures in neuroanatomy, things I have to know. You have to know sagittal, coronal, axial, and common diseases. I put some of my heroes on the wall to inspire me. Whatever it was that I was interested in learning or studying at that time. And this stuff really gave me an advantage. I was told that I had gotten a perfect score by one of the examiners on my neuroradiology boards. It's not a numerical score, but they verbally told me. Okay. And what I'm trying to say is these things ramp up your ability to have contact with the material. I always listen to an audiobook in my car. So every week I read at least one book, typically sitting in the bathroom. And I read at least one book by listening to an audiobook, the typical book. Let's say, you know, I commute an hour each way. That's 10 hours in a car, typically. 10 hours is the length of most books, about that. So anyways, because a lot of people tell me, oh, I have no time to read. I have no time to read. I know tons of doctors. Almost none of them ever reads anything. Okay. And I tell them they're a bunch of functional illiterates. I automatically read 2 books easy. And then when I'm eating dinner, I'll typically read a book or I'll watch an internet video or something about nutrition or health or something. Okay. So that was my first set of books. That was my first. After the gap between med school fellowship, that was when I started writing. And then I had some experiences too. I had some friends, a bunch of lawyer friends, and they told me, you know, Pete, your writing kind of sucks. And I'm like, what do you mean my writing sucks? And I go, well, it's kind of sophomoric, you know. You're really like your sense of rhetoric and sentence structure, it's kind of weak. You know, you're like a college kid or something. And I was a little bit insulted by that, but I went back through the book and I realized they were right. So I started to study rhetoric. And I started to read all these books about writing because I wanted to become a better writer. And I'll just tell you one typical story. You know, one of my kids was in high school and he had some buddies over and I'm walking past them and they go, hey, Dad, do you know anything about rhetoric? And I go, a little bit. And they go, can you give us an example of rhetoric? And I go, yeah, sure. John F. Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And they go, yeah, that's like 100 years ago. That's all BS. I mean, do you know anything that's relevant to life now? And I'm like, you can take these rhetorical forms and use them as a template. Like, for example, you could say, you know, to your girlfriend, ask not what a boyfriend can do for a girl, but what a girl can do for a boy. You know, I'm like, you ask not what a husband can do for a wife, but what a wife can do for a husband. And they go, oh, hey, Dad, that's pretty good. It's like you can get some power out of these things if you learn how to adapt them to real life. So I studied all this stuff with rhetoric. And there's JFK and Jackie, 2 of my favorite people in the political sphere. All right. And so I also went back and studied the ancient Greeks because I'd heard lots of great things about the ancient Greeks. And I studied the ancient Greeks when I was young, but I kind of, you know, forgot it. I was absorbed in medicine. You know, so tons of studying to be a medical student and then to be a resident and a fellow and to learn all that stuff, all those procedures. So I went back and I was like, wow, the Greeks are awesome. And I really loved Thucydides. And Thucydides' statement about his writing of the Peloponnesian War. Well, first of all, he was a bit of an exile. He'd been fired as an admiral in the Greek military. And so he then became a writer. He had some time. And here's his quote. My history has been composed. He wrote the history of the Peloponnesian War between Sparta and Athens. He said, my history has been composed to be an everlasting possession, not just a showpiece of an hour. This book was written not for the applause of the moment, but as a gift to mankind for all time. And I thought, that's cool. I go, you want to do something great and as like a work of art. Good work should be like a work of art. Why not make something great and beautiful and magnificent as best as you can do? I don't like doing things half-ass, okay? So I really admire that. And this is the painting of Pericles' funeral oration, and there's the Acropolis, the great city of Athens. Okay, and I also saw, like the history of Socrates. And Socrates, stuck to his truth, and, he suffered for it. Here he is, and Socrates, kind of got bumped off for telling the truth. And here's Plato, very sad. And Plato was like, what the heck is this? What kind of a city persecutes its best man? Okay, so that inspired Plato to write the Republic and whatnot, and in the form of a dialogue. And also, people take their failures, and you take your failures and your previous experience and you put it into something new. And I like that about Plato. Plato had wanted to be a playwright, but he just wasn't that good of a playwright compared to Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides and Aristophanes. So, but he had that experience of writing plays. Okay, he wanted to be a politician, and he was actually a consultant to some politicians in the Greek area, and he was too bossy and a pain in the ass, and they actually threw him in prison. Okay, so that didn't turn out so well for him either. But he certainly learned quite a bit from all those experiences. So then he came back and he saw what happened to Socrates. Is very sad, but it gave him the energy and the knowledge to write, Plato's Republic, Plato's dialogues. And he would write them in the form of a play, like a conversation. And Socrates was a new type of hero in ancient Greece, the idea of an intellectual hero, a moral hero. And I thought that was really cool. So what I'm saying is, I got all kinds of ideas from just studying, the great people of the past, the great men of the past. All right. And that really helped me. Okay. And also there was some humor in it. I like, for example, Diogenes was the funny philosopher. He's like the homeless philosopher of ancient Greek. And, Plato, they go, Plato, what is your definition of a man? And Plato said, a man is a featherless biped. And so Diogenes plucked a chicken and he had let it run around in front of Plato's school at the academy. And he said, look, here is Plato's idea of a man. And so that kind of thing is really good. And I noticed too, there's sort of like two big streaks of Christianity. There is a streak of Christianity that comes through Plato and goes to Augustine, and Nietzsche had called Christianity Platonism for the masses. There's the other streak of it that comes from Aristotle, goes through Aquinas, and led to the Renaissance. Okay. And so that whole thing was interesting. So I was really interested in how does the past history, affect, the present. And I think you got to study history in order to be able to see things with an objective perspective. And I noticed other things, and this is going to connect to what I'm coming to later, that, a lot of times it's a common theme in literature and life that people who do good heroic things, they often don't get much appreciation for it. Okay, Prometheus stole fire from Mount Olympus from Zeus, and Zeus was pissed off at him, chained him to a rock, and had an eagle eat at his liver every day. I'm like, holy crap. And there he is. Luckily, Hercules came and saved him. He shot the eagle with an arrow and freed him. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is, I notice in sports, when you're an athlete, everybody likes you. The other players on your team like you, the coach like you, the fans like you, even the other teams like a good athlete. And so I kind of hoped in my naive, young college-age mind, I thought, well, if I become a great scholar, a great doctor, scientist, or something, my life's going to get better. I won't be lonely. I'll have a good woman. Everything will be better. I won't be by myself lonely all the time. And so what I'm trying to say, though, I've been very disappointed to learn that as you get great at science and medicine, you start refuting the past stuff and you try to improve things. But in medicine, they get pissed off at you because big money is making money off having things exactly the way they are, selling drugs, selling surgery, selling CAT scans. They don't like some new person to come along and say, well, we could do it better. They're like, well, hey, if we do it your way, we don't make money. Get out of here. So I was kind of sad to discover that. It's sort of like the better you get at science and medicine, the more people hate you. I'm sorry, but it's kind of true. So that's been like one of the great disappointments of my life is that, I have all these great ideas. I've rewritten the textbooks about neurodegeneration of the spine and the brain, but no one gives a shit because those ideas don't make money. Okay, and I love Cicero, for example. Cicero had a great quote here: to not know what happened before you were born is to forever remain a child. Okay, he was the greatest orator. He was the greatest of all Romans. So what I'm trying to say is if you want to be great yourself, you should study the great men and people of the past so you develop this knowledge of them. Okay, like here's a great quote by Cicero. First of all, cui bono, who benefits? A lot of situations, if you want to know what's really going on, ask yourself who benefits. All right, here's a Cicero quote. The Republic, when we inherited, was like a beautiful painting that was already faded at the edges. But in our time, not only has it been neglected and have we not tried to freshen it and renew its color, but we haven't even bothered to preserve its forms and outlines. What now is left of our ancient customs, on which the Commonwealth of Rome is firmly founded? They have been so utterly buried in oblivion that they are not only not practiced, they are forgotten. Does that sound familiar? Nice painting of Cicero here. Okay, so because I told you, my friends mocked my writing skill, I started to study writing. I read like everything you could read about writing. I read all these books on writing, all these articles, essays. The internet was around by this time. And then I wrote my own book on writing, rhyme, rhetoric, and logic. I studied everything you could study about writing. And I put it all together in there. And I also had collected thousands of pages of quotes. And so I just wrote this other book about 800 pages on just the best quotes, the ones that would work for that type of audience. I had it in alphabetical order. I called it the Holy Grail of wisdom quotes. Okay. And I had a lot of fun doing that. Okay. But I have tons more quotes than what's in that book. That's really the best stuff for prime time. And then here's another thing that's kind of funny. I show you this picture of like my current house. So it's really my wife's house. I joke that my wife is like my landlord. Instead of having to pay all the bills every month, I just write her one check. And I like it because I don't have to do anything, and I refuse to do anything. But on the other hand, like I have like my library. I have tons and tons of books. This is typical of like my basement. I have books on top of books on top of books on top of books. They're all over the place. And you see all these paper towels here? You know what that's all about? On the floor above, where the public visitors allowed to go, my wife has all her dogs. And they piss on the floor and it leaks through the basement. So I have to cover up all my books with paper towels. And that's what I joke about. Here I am, supposedly this good doctor, and I live almost like a homeless person in a basement with a dog pissing on my stuff all the time. So it's kind of pathetic, but I've learned to make it work. I wrote another book called How to Raise IQ and Become a Genius. And I got that from all the ideas I saw not only from my own past experience and my additional reading and seeing like what my kids went through. So this is the book, like if you want to educate your kid, to help your kid become smart, that's the stuff, okay? And like I said, too, I noticed when I go on the internet, I'm trying to learn more about nutrition, most of the nutrition experts are BSing the public because they're trying to sell stuff. You must buy my supplement or you will become demented. You must buy my supplement, okay? And that kind of motivated me to write too, because, I wanted to be a great doctor who does good things for people. And it's like, well, how do you serve the public? They're not going to let you serve the public very much in conventional medicine. They just want you generate billing codes. So I said, I'm going to have to either make internet videos or write books. So this is one of the, all-time great health books, The Start Solution by Dr. McDougall, Dr. Potato. And I'm like, well, gee, I got to learn more. And, maybe I'm going to start writing books about health. And I also looked very closely at the foundational science of internal medicine and conventional medicine in general. What I came to realize is it's a big joke. It's a house of cards. It really is a big joke. Almost every chapter in conventional medical books says the same things. This disease is associated with aging, seems to be partly genetic, might be related to a virus. I'm like, what horseshit is that? It's blowing smoke at the people. It really is a joke. And you see all these students, they study their little tails off learning physics and calculus and physical chemistry. That has nothing to do with medicine. There is some chemistry in medicine, but it's like NET is what really matters. Nutrition, epidemiology, and toxicology. That's what makes people sick. So the doctors are studying all these things. You could take a health coach and just have them watch videos for a month. They'll know more than a doctor who's done pre-med, medical school, a three-year residency, and a 3-year fellowship, okay? It's the truth. I laugh all the time. I'll have students follow me around for 2 hours, and they're like, I want a refund from my medical school. I can teach them more in 2 hours of hanging around me than they'll have learned in the last 8 years. Easy. I do it all the time. Okay, so anyways, that realization that conventional medicine was a big joke. When I was a young guy, I looked at those books with awe. This is the Harvard textbook of pathology, the Harvard textbook of internal medicine. Now I laugh at them. They're a joke, okay? What they basically do is they bribe the professors at the Ivy League and the big name medical centers to write a bunch of bogus papers to promote selling drugs. And then most of the other healthcare providers really don't know that much, and they just believe whatever they're told, and they're conformist. And that's how all these stupid patterns continue, even though they're kind of ridiculous. Okay. And, I also had, here's the joke about Alice in Wonderland. One pill makes you small, one pill makes you tall. And I'm like, well, gee, almost all this stuff is kind of common sense, logic, epidemiology, and most of it, it's all pretty much free. It's available to every person on the planet. Whereas all this is more pills, more expensive tests, more surgery, etc. Okay. And I looked at all the science papers. I'm like, gosh, they're constantly lying. Because the big corporations, they bought the corporations and they bought the scientists. These scientists are poor guys. They just want to grant money so they can do the research. Basically, big money tells the scientists, look, you either help us sell our drug or you don't get any money. And if you piss us off, we'll get you fired. And like, take a look at this. In 2023, over 10,000 papers were retracted. And I'm like, conventional science, it's a joke. And that's also, people don't like it when I talk about religion. Well, I'll talk about religion every day, because I'm going to tell you, you have to have a Bible-based view that says the individual is the most important thing. And I like what Ayn Rand said. She says individual rights, individuals are the smallest minorities. If you respect individual rights, you respect everyone's rights. And it's the truth. The reason why all of healthcare and all of medicine is a joke and it's never going to get better unless it changes its psychology is because unless you say man is created in the image of God and therefore part divine and therefore special, and we value him, his health, his rights, what's best for him, just like a mother and a father love a child, you have to love the patient and the individual. Otherwise, it always goes to advertising. Nobody in the world is going to teach people a vegan diet if they can make $150,000 off of open heart surgery and $30,000 off each stent. It's not going to happen. A hospital director is under pressure. He's got to make money, and he's always going to go for the stent and the surgery if it becomes based on money. That's why you have to have the philosophical thing. So anyways, I basically had like a Copernican shift. I'm like, holy crap. I devoted my whole life to becoming, Mr. Doctor Scientist guy, just to be, a BS pawn of Big Pharma to sell drugs. I didn't give up my life and work this hard just to become a drug dealer. I want to be a healer, not a dealer. So I'm going to try to learn what's right for all these different situations and communicate that in a book or a video. And hopefully somebody will watch it. I stink at business. I stink at marketing. I don't have any ability really to reach a large audience. But what I can do, I will put the information there, kind of like a lighthouse to guide the motivated, curious people. They give them a chance, okay? Because what you see in a hospital, it's just a disaster. It's like one patient after another, fat, sick, and stupid. They come in for all these problems, all this fancy surgery, all their drugs are on 10, 20, 30 pills, and they have zero chance of ever getting better because they don't have the energy and curiosity and ability to learn or desire to learn. If they did, they could get better. So anyways, I started cranking out nutrition books, how to fix your fat ass. I wrote this book here, How to Reduce the Risk of Cancer and Chronic Disease. I went through a lot of molecular biology, biochemistry, and I went back through all my biochemistry, molecular biology to make sure I was strong on it, my physiology, because, I used to be great at all that stuff and I loved it. I'd been away from it all this time as a surgeon and a radiologist. So I made myself strong in those areas. And I actually think that's one of my big strengths is that I'm not just coming from one field of medicine. I was best in my class, pathology. I know the anatomy. I've got the whole picture. And that's why I read lots of papers and journals. I'm like, gosh, I understand this better than anybody in the world. I understand it better than the person who wrote this paper. I should be writing books. I should be writing papers. So that's kind of where it came from. Okay. And also I will include jokes in my books. I will include all kinds of philosophy in them because I think it's relevant. And if you ever want to know, like, what's my funniest book? A Tale of Two Toes in a Hot Tub. I had a bunch of doctors come up to me and say, Pete, that's the funniest book I ever read in my whole life. Because it talks about comparing two patients. One's a typical fat, stupid patient that makes all the mistakes and goes through all kinds of terrible suffering. The typical patient, they go drug, chop, 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 losing body parts. And it's kind of sad and miserable, but you have to know it because that's what the average patient, and all the funny stories I've heard, over the years when I was an imaging guided surgeon and stuff. So A Tale of Two Toes, How to Improve Blood Flow. And then I wrote a trilogy, this one here, Hot Topics in Clinical Nutrition, Journey to Optimal Health. But at the time I wrote all these books, I didn't know how to draw on a computer. And then I had this book too. I developed the best theory of spinal degeneration, primarily ischemic spine. There's a couple chemicals that contribute to it too. Because I see it. I read all the films. I talked to all the neuroradiologists and like, Pete, you have the best explanation of spine that exists in the whole world. And so it's really, I call it the ischemic theory of spine disease. There had been some papers back in the 1980s about ischemia, lack of blood flow, contributing to degenerative disc disease. But I figured it out. It's not just DJD of the spine. It's degenerative disc disease of the entire spine. It's DISH, diffuse idiopathic skeletal hyperostosis, ossification of the posterior longitudinal ligament, OPLL, OLF, ossification of ligamentum flavum. It's Bastrup's disease as well. So I figured out the whole thing, the way it goes from the pelvic to the scapula. And I just wrote in a book. I was pissed off too. I would apply for grants and there would be competitions. There would be preliminary rounds and then advanced round to win the prize, the grant money. And they wouldn't even let me out of the preliminary rounds. And I would write to the journals. They would refuse to publish my paper or my articles. And then meanwhile, all the neuroradiologists, they would sit there and tell me, and the spine doctors, they would say, Pete, all your stuff is the best. It explains everything. Plus, whenever there was a complex case, everybody would come to me. I'd figure out the complex cases. So I was pissed off because the reason I couldn't get it published is if you're injecting steroids into somebody's spine, you're making money. If you're operating, you cut them open, you make money. On the other hand, you teach them the vegan diet, you teach them to avoid these dietary toxins. You don't make any money for that. So the journals won't publish it. Okay. So I'm like, this is ridiculous. So I just published my own book. And that kind of got me, I liked about publishing books. I could publish a book fast. And if anybody wants to read it, it's there. I don't have any ability to market it. I have the best theory on dementia, the Peter Rogers, MD theory on neurovascular uncoupling. So I wrote that book. Oh, I want to also tell you what happened. How did I crank out books so fast? Okay, then I also, I explained the metabolic theory of cancer. This is the best book on cancer that's ever been written. It's sitting right there, and it's all illustrated. So these new versions are full of illustrations. Those are my wrestling coaches. That's Dave Schultz and Mark Schultz, world and Olympic champions. And then I sort of combined a whole bunch of stuff into one book. If you want the best advanced summary of molecular biology and biochemistry of nutrition and health and what causes disease. Here it is, Medical Reformation of Vegan Renaissance Bible. It's the most advanced, best medical book that's ever been written, okay? It just is. If you read it, you'll be amazed. Holy crap, that's what causes diabetes. Holy crap, that's what causes hypertension, obesity, dementia, spinal degeneration. It's there, okay? I did it. I don't have any way to advertise it, but I'm telling you, it's there. If you want it, it's there. And I also looked around me and I sort of see, I remember, the greatness of America, like let's say in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan was the governor of California. It's super rich. It was so rich, people could even go to college for free. I mean, I saw all these incredible things. And I remember how my dad made like 4 or 5 times as much money as doctors do now. And I also looked at a lot of art and I saw things like the best art, it comes from a combination of things, a love of God, but also a personal desire to create. And for example, this is by Michelangelo, the greatest sculpture ever made, the Pietà. And what's really happening here, Jesus Christus is smaller than Mary. His mother died when he was only 7 years old, and he missed his mother and loved his mother so much that in a sense, this is him with his mother. And partly that's why it's so great, okay? And even like, you take somebody like one day my kids are listening to this rap music and I'm like, turn that crap off. That's for retards. That's annoying. And they're like, no, Dad, Eminem is a genius. I go, no, he's a scumbag, filthy drug addict, tattooed moron. Don't even bother me. They go, no, Dad, you're wrong. Eminem is a genius. And I'm like, yeah, right. So I started looking at Eminem's writing. And I'll tell you something. Eminem is a lyrical genius and a poet. And the stuff he writes about his daughter and his wife, those things are magnificent, okay? Don't get me wrong, I think he's a scumbag, derelict, degenerate. But what I'm trying to say is when somebody writes about something personal and it comes from the heart and they're also trying to create something good and beautiful, that's where a lot of great work comes from. It doesn't come from shock value. It comes from this inner source. And Christianity captures a lot of the basic story of mankind's dilemma. Like here is Jean Valjean and the Bishop Venu, and this is in Les Miserables, where basically he screwed up and he's going back to the slammer, but the bishop forgives him. And it's kind of like the message of Jesus Christus, love each other, forgive each other. And then Jean Valjean goes on. He's grateful for the mercy he was given. He goes on to become the best man in all of France. It's an awesome book. It's one of my all-time favorite books. I think it's the second greatest novel of all time after Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens, okay? Because I love the way Scrooge turned around from being a jerk to being good. Okay, and what I'm trying to say is when I looked around in society, I see the society is being degraded. You go to a museum nowadays, an art museum has become modern art. Modern art is a fake. It's the emperor's new clothes. It's a lie. And this is what you get when you drift into atheism. An atheistic culture cannot hold together. People having statues of feces. And like I said, if somebody from the Renaissance walked through our society nowadays and they go to an art museum and they see statues of feces, in their own museum, they've got Michelangelo's Pietà, and they go to our place and they see this, they go, these people are degenerate scum, barbarians, evil. They would have complete contempt for us. And I know that most people are conformists and really weak-minded, and they put up with this crap. This crap is crap. It's unacceptable. People should not accept that. It's a degradation of a society. And I see the same things like the Tom Wolfe quote, modern office buildings look like animal cages, and there's always a statue of a turd in front. A child could make this. Picasso stinks. People just say he's a good artist because they want to conform. His art stinks. A child could make this in junior high, okay? And these buildings look like animal cages. Tom Wolfe is right. And there's often some nonsense thing that looks like a turd in front, and people should not put up with it, but they do. Look at the medieval cathedrals. They're magnificent because people sometimes tell me, why do you like religion? Why do you think there's anything good about religion? I go, I'm telling you, because the best achievements of mankind, I see a large most of them come from this background. So how can I not want to understand that and be part of it in some way? And then you say, well, look at our great universities. Our universities now stink because they become so corrupted that all they're trying to do is get money. You know, they're lying to get grant money. And once you lose sort of a moral foundation, man is created in the image of God, therefore part divine, we must do right by him, we must honor God, we must try to follow the Ten Commandments. Once you lose that, everything just goes to money. And then you end up in atheistic Darwinism that might is right, whoever's got the money and the power can do whatever they want. And that ends up in a very cruel society. As Dostoevsky had said, if there is no God, then everything is permitted, even cannibalism. So what I'm trying to say is if you want to create beautiful art and beautiful literature and beautiful science and beautiful lectures and other things, you need to try to have that beauty in your heart. You have to have a good sense. This type of stuff, atheism, statues of feces, it doesn't inspire anything. It's an insult to mankind. And I also notice there's sort of a deterioration of the public mind. You know, people are going to Twitter for 40 characters, messages or something. People in the 1800s were smarter. I love Ayn Rand's book, The Romantic Manifesto. She says the three great times in the cultural history of the world are the ancient Greeks, the Renaissance, and then the 1800s, okay? The 1800s in Europe were magnificent. And this book is a lot about the literature and the art of that time. And so I went back and studied these things for myself. You know, when I was in med school residency fellowship, I didn't have much time. I was working. And then when I was trying to become partner in the group, I was working like a dog. You know, I was working 12 hours a day. I barely come home, eat a little food, go to sleep, all right? So later, though, I had a little bit of time to read. And I read through all this stuff. And I go, gee, all this is magnificent. And I loved all this stuff. And I see society kind of going down the tubes. And so that was part of the reason why I want to share with people, teach them a little bit about civilization and the great works of man, because these things ennoble you, okay? You read a great book. It's like Aristotle had said. Aristotle said the poets are more important than the historians because the historians only tell you the way things were. The poets tell you how they ought to be. And the idea, and Ayn Rand had said this, in the young person's mind, they are like a guide of what is possible. So they inspire you to a higher level of consciousness. And they're transcendent. They're magnificent. Okay. And look at all these guys. Michelangelo. I saw the angel in the marble and I sculpted him till I set him free. I do everything to glorify God. Bach. All my work is to the glory of God. Isaac Newton. He spent more time, you know, translating the Bible, writing Bible commentary than he did doing science. And so what I'm saying is a little bit of this mindset leads to great achievement. If you want to achieve something great, you should admire people who have achieved great things. Okay, these are like the best people in the world ever in their field. Michelangelo is the greatest artist of all time. Bach's the greatest composer of all time. Newton is the greatest scientist of all time. And I like what he did in 1665. There was a plague in the land of England. And so he just finished up at Oxford and he went to stay at the family cottage in Woolsthorpe. And he just wanted to sit around thinking and trying to understand a few things, trying to understand gravity, trying to understand the basic mechanics and physics and some things in optics. And so he just sat around thinking and doing little experiments at home. And during that year, 1665, called the Annum Mirabilis, the miracle year, he figured out the theory of gravity, how to, you know, complete his system of calculus. Okay, him and Leibniz sort of co-discovered it. But what I'm trying to say is an individual can make tremendous intellectual achievements just by being alone. You got to be alone a lot of time. Unfortunately, it's just a reality in order to do really advanced thinking. And that came to me because we had the big, you know, viral infection going around a couple of years ago, and nobody knew how significant it was going to be when the plagues had come into other times. You know, 1/3 of the population had died, even a half of the population. So I'm like, holy crap, I might never, I might die. I better, I had like an idea for like 6 books in my head. I'm like, how can I write 6 books? I'm just too darn busy. I work full time. I've always worked full time as a clinical doctor. So I said, you know what? I need to figure out how to do this because I wanted to make sure I wrote those 6 books. So what I did was I studied people like Robert Pirsig, who wrote Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. What he would do is go to bed real early, then wake up early because you're always smartest when you first wake up in the morning. The brain cleans itself at night through the lymphatic system, and your brain cells clear out all their waste products. You get a little jolt of cortisol, catecholamine, stress response to get you going in the morning. Because when does an animal need to be smart? When it's hungry. So breakfast, after you wake up in the morning, you're hungry. And so your brain makes you smart and gives you energy to go find some food. And you can take that boost of energy and use it to do your academic work. You're always smartest in the morning. So if you get up earlier, you got more smart hours, so to speak. We become stupid after we eat lunch. So I often won't even eat lunch. I now eat the old man diet, 1 meal a day diet just at dinner. But anyways, so I said, I'm going to imitate him. And I developed a system for cranking stuff out. Oh, just a little bit more. I studied all the stuff that happened in Rome. You know, Nero would use the Christians as torches. He set Rome on fire because he needed to free up land. He could build stuff. Then he blamed it on the Christian. He would burn them as torches. So what I'm trying to say is it's a little bit of an atheistic Darwinism mentality in Rome. And this is what it leads to. It leads to people being treated this way, okay? He sent them to the Colosseum, and it was awful. And so I saw all these different patterns of behavior. I kind of like ancient Rome because you can talk about things without people getting emotional. Here's St. Peter preaching in the catacombs, and read Quo Vadis, probably the fourth greatest novel of all time, about the contrast between the early Romans and the early Christians. And so I admired them. They were good. They talked about love. They talked about forgiveness and kindness. And you need those things. In a sense, the ancient Greeks and even the ancient Romans were kind of like, reason alone is all you need. And Jesus Christus sort of brought to mind, no, we need a lot more forgiveness and love. And he's right. Because if you don't have that, it always ends up tit for tat. The Hatfields and the McCoys, the Montagues and the Capulets, constant back and forth fighting. So you need somebody to say, look, I'm sorry this all happened. Let's forgive each other. Let's get along. Let's make things work. You need that, okay? Otherwise, things go down into the garbage can. And you see my tie here? What are the colors here? These are the colors of Christianity: faith, love, hope, and charity, okay? Love and charity are kind of the same thing, all right? So white is the faith, green is the hope, and the red is the love. And of these, the most important one is love. And this comes from 1 Corinthians. And again, why are parents, mom and dad, the two best people in the world for a baby? Because they love the baby. That's what makes it work. You need that love. And that's why I'm saying, that's why modern healthcare stinks. That's why our universities stink, because they're trying to pretend love doesn't matter. And what it turns into is just a crapshoot where whoever's pulling the strings figures out how can they get themselves more money, and they destroy these institutions. And that's what's happened. That's why medicine's been destroyed. And that's why no medical, surgical, bullshitology, technology can ever fix it unless you fix that problem. Okay, I know all the high-tech stuff. I'm as high-tech a doctor as a doctor could be. All right, and I can tell you, it can't make things better for the patients, because it doesn't have a system based on love, based on doing what's right for the patient. It's based on making money for the system. Okay. And most docs don't really know what's going on. They got an IQ of about 120. They do as they're told. They follow the standard of care. The standard of care comes from the big name universities and the Ivy League places, who basically do the bidding of the drug companies and the manufacturer device companies, because that's who gives them grant money. And it can't be fixed unless somebody says, you know what? We need to do what's best for these patients, even if we don't make as much money. They won't allow anybody to do that. Anybody to be fired, to be driven out. Okay. And I sort of saw the contrast. I saw what happened with Quo Vadis, and I saw the price paid by St. Peter's and the others, okay? And I see where the United States is now. This is a series of paintings called Course of Empire by Thomas Cole. Magnificent series of paintings. Him and Michelangelo are the two greatest story painters of all time. And this is the late phase in the Course of Empire when it starts being chaotic and destroyed. And so USA is sort of in this phase, and I hope we can bounce back to better times, okay? We don't have to inevitably let the place fall to pieces, okay? And I read all this stuff, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Edward Gibbon's, all this stuff, okay? And I like the debate between, I don't know how much longer I can go on with this talk, because it could take too long, but I sort of like the debate between Dostoevsky and Nietzsche. Now, they never really debated in real life, but I went through all their quotes, and you could almost match their quotes up. And what I'm trying to say is we need a mentality more like Dostoevsky. Read his book, Brothers Karamazov, and what you see is Alyosha, the character who was sort of like in the genre of Jesus Christus: love thy neighbor, be nice, forgive people, let them speak, give them the benefit of the doubt. You could then work towards making things work and getting along, versus Nietzsche's mentality was the greatest men are Napoleon and Bismarck, and the strong and the smart should just, eugenics and get rid of all the weak and the poor and the stupid. And then Christianity is a religion of weaklings. And I think that's also because he was a homosexual, and he saw Christianity as being against that. I think that's one of the deep secrets of Nietzsche that's not well known. But still, Nietzsche's mentality was kind of like the English mentality of atheistic Darwinism. England liked the theory of Charles Darwin because it basically said might is right, and they are superior to the other countries, therefore they should rule them. For example, my father's from Ireland, okay? So they basically said Irish people are inferior, therefore they should be our slaves. And believe me, the Irish were enslaved for about 1,000 years. So what I'm trying to say is the world needs to come up with a value system where people can get along and work. And I think Alyosha, the character in Brothers Karamazov, is a very good role model. Even the genius brother, Ivan, couldn't make things work without sort of this basic kindness stuff that Alyosha had. So I won't go into that too much more, but this is a magnificent painting of the 1400s, Descent from the Cross by Rogier van der Weyden. What I'm trying to say is they were making magnificent, off-the-charts, great works of art in the 1400s. Why is it that artists nowadays stink? Because their mind's in the wrong place. Their personal value and philosophy system is no good. And I loved all these old chivalry paintings and stuff, so we won't go into all this stuff now. And I like what Will Durant said. Will Durant said that the best a man can do is learn about the good things in his civilization and try to transmit them to the next generation. If he's fortunate, before he dies, he will gather up all this information of his heritage, civilization, his culture, and transmit it to his children. At his final breath, he will be grateful for this inexhaustible legacy, knowing it is our nourishing mother and our lasting life. Civilization is not inherited. It's not inherited. It's not automatic. It has to be learned. And if this transmission should be interrupted, civilization would die. Okay. So that's what's happening in the United States. People are becoming functional illiterates. The school system no longer teaches the Bible, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, the Renaissance, all this stuff. And we are becoming third world barbarians. We don't want that. Okay. Here's a great painting of Aeneas carrying his father Anchises out of burning Troy with his son there. There's his wife. And so basically that's what we should do, figuratively, literally, is carry out the knowledge of our predecessors. Painting here by Carl. And so I'm trying to do the same thing, for example, in nutrition, trying to teach people about the discoveries of McDougall. He gets a little pissed off. Put me down, you little upstarts. And then I like this painting here, Thomas Cole. This is The Voyage of Life. There is the childhood phase. It's a beautiful painting. And this one right here is youth. And so youth, like the young man, he's headed towards his utopia, perceived vision of the future in the sky. Mama, the guardian angel's a little farther away from him. He's not even looking. He's just so excited. She's like, bye, darling. And he's headed down this beautiful path to utopia. But in reality, the river takes a bend. And when you start going around the river, it starts taking up speed and becomes a rapids and goes through the rocks. And that's what real life is like. And I think that's what it's like for young people. Like, you try talking to a 20-year-old, they're like, what do you got to say to me, old man? I'm fine. My testosterone's higher than yours. I don't need to hear your BS. I'm taking these protein supplements just like a bodybuilder on the internet. And, it's hard to talk to them. But people hit middle age and they start having problems. They start having some diseases, some health issues, et cetera, et cetera. They see their friends having them. And they kind of become like this guy right here going over the rapids. This is the third painting in that series, The Voyage of Life by Thomas Cole from the Hudson River School. Okay. And so this is where you can really help people the most, because if they turn their act around at this phase in the game, they can make dramatic improvements. Okay. By the time the boat's already crashed on the rocks and they're drowning, it's harder to save them. All right. So middle age is the biggest chance to really help people. You can help them any phase in the game where they turn their act around, but this is the big one. And I saw that you can give a person an extra 30 years of good health versus a lot of things I was doing in surgery is I would put in drainage tubes for all kinds of, complex medical problems when I was an imaging guided surgeon. And the patient would be in their last year of life. They're already dying of metastatic cancer. I could buy them a few weeks, a few months maybe, but I kind of really love this idea of with nutrition, you could buy them 30, 40 years of good health, 50 years. All right. And I love this painting. This whole series is magnificent. And I jokingly said, I like the circles of hell is what I see these patients going through. I see the most awful things every day long. All these patients, their toes are amputated, their foot's amputated, their legs amputated below the knee, legs amputated at the thigh. They're cut open all over the place. Got 10 tubes coming out of them. It's miserable. They're vomiting. They're dying. Endless misery is what I see all day long in conventional healthcare. And like I said, I talk about the circles of hell. From caffeine to alcohol to all these diseases, excitotoxins, et cetera. And it totally reminds me, this is a painting by Dino Di Durante. It's beautiful. Okay. And I also noticed something too. The best speakers and the best teachers, there is something a little bit wild about them. So I remember when I was a kid, Evel Knievel talking about his next big plan, to jump over Snake River Canyon and stuff. And I can remember as a kid, we used to ride our bikes, the Stingray bikes, the wheelies, and pop a wheelie and go over a jump ramp. A little crazy, but we used to remember the saying, Evel Knievel, bones heal, chicks dig scars, pain is temporary, glory is forever. And what I'm trying to say is, if you want to be good, you got to be a little bit bold. You got to take a little chances. People will get pissed off at you sometimes, say you're crazy, say you suck, whatever. But unless you try to make things better, to try a new joke, to try something more, you can't improve if you're always afraid. So the only way not to get criticized or offend anybody is to be a conformist wimp. But if you're a conformist wimp, you'll never achieve anything. So you gotta, take some chances. Okay. This is another one of my book. I wrote this book, Best Christian Art. I just put masterpieces in it. Okay. And actually in real life, when anybody sees this book, they all want a copy of the book and they all want to look at it. Okay. In real life. But when I post videos on the internet, almost nobody watches the video. All I did was take the masterpieces. It's the best survey art book ever written. So I don't have, like, usually a typical art book is written by some college professor. There's a bunch of cave paintings. Then there's a bunch of stuff, Byzantine flat stuff that stinks. And then the last third of the book's a bunch of modern art that's all fake and they pretend it's real. They suck. Okay. So anyways, this is just an example. I've written all these books. So how do I write so many books? And my secret is I use the row your boat method. What I mean by that is when I first wake up in the morning, I crank the most difficult thing, whatever's super hard, like what is the biochemistry of mitochondrial inhibitors, okay? I will go through that first, the mechanism of complex 3 inhibition in diabetes. And then I'll crank on the most difficult thing when I first wake up in the morning. I'll go to bed early the night before. And then when I start to hit a little bit of a plateau, intellectual plateau, I'll do a brief exercise, do my laundry or something, whatever. And then I'll come back and I'll often work on the second book. The second book is farther into the past. And I'll just study something that's easier for me to read about, okay? And then in the evening, I'll watch videos. I'll get ideas. I'll do some light reading. Maybe I'll read some scientific papers. So what I'm saying is I'm finishing up the difficult book, and I use my top brain time in the morning for that one. I got the intermediate book working in the afternoon when I got intermediate level cognitive function, and I'm building the structure, the foundation for that book. And then in the evening, I'm just going through whatever quirky catches my moment. And I always read about stuff that, like, people ask me stuff. Like, I'll have a doctor friend at work and say, what do you know about this disease? Or somebody calls me up and says, my brother or my sister has this disease. Could you look that up? And I'll look it up. And I like doing that because now I have an emotional connection to it, and I just keep accumulating these things, and then I'll keep a file. This is all this information on diabetes, like I said, dementia, et cetera. And so then when I go back to write a book, I've got all these files already. They're just not organized, and I organize them. But that's how I've done it. I've written, 20-something books. That's how I do it. And that 1 year when we had the big viral plague that first year and nobody knew if they were going to live or die, I said, you know what? I got 6 books I want to read. I want to write before I die. And so all I did, no social media. I got rid of my cell phone. I don't need this freaking thing. It's just an annoyance anyways. Nobody wants to talk to me anyways. And anybody really needs to get a hold of me, they know how to get a hold of me. So I got rid of my phone. I did almost next to zero email, no social media, nothing. All I did was put all my energy on cranking the books out. And I cranked out 6 books in 1 year. Okay. That's how I could do it. And these are just some examples of my books. And here I kind of joke. You're going to see. So I joke like the Vatican Museum of Art. I kind of joke that the Veg Source is is like a museum of nutrition knowledge. Okay, like the Vatican. I'll show you the next picture why. Because here's why I thought of that picture. I probably should put them in a different order. There's Pope Julius. So Pope Julius in this case is kind of like Jeff Nelson here. Okay. And then he's working with the artists and the scholars. He's working with Michelangelo, with Bramante, with Raphael to redesign St. Peter's Basilica. And Pope Julius is my favorite pope, okay? People say, oh, he's an asshole. You know what? Because he's a tough old son of a bitch. He fought against the French when they were invading Italy. He fought against the other city-states when they tried to take away the papal states, the Vatican's property. He got all these artists, to kind of work together and make this great stuff. And so what I'm trying to say is, you need leadership to try to make good things happen on a big scale. Okay. And so he made it happen. Okay. Martin Luther said, oh, Pope Julius and the popes all stink. They're all corrupt. You know what? He did some very good things. What more could you ask the guy to do but help create the greatest art ever in the history of the world, some of the greatest architecture ever in the history of the world, the greatest sculpture ever in the history of the world. So I thought he did some pretty good things, and he kept the Vatican from being submersed and taken over. So anyways, I thought that was kind of funny. I just thought of that this morning. That's Jeff right there. Pope Julius. So anyways, this was just a little bit about, just a little trick I do when I write is I got the idea from Plato and Plato's Republic of having dialogues like a play. So I would have a character like interrogate me and ask me questions. For example, I love the Grand Inquisitor from Brothers Karamazov, that chapter. So I would have him ask me questions like in this particular one. I was in one of my books, and in the afterward, I wrote about how did I write so many books? And the Grand Inquisitor would say things like, how did you write 6 books in 1 year? That's too fast. They must all suck. Okay. So then I would answer his questions. So I'm just playing a game. Again, the idea is like the Plato's Republic of dialogues and making it like a play, making it more fun, conversational. Okay, this is just some fun stuff. We don't get really enough time to go into all this stuff. But yeah, when you're older, you kind of have developed a lot of knowledge and judgment. And that's one of the things that gets better in a man. Like men are best at playing sports from the ages of about 18 to 35. Okay. But intellectually, they actually keep getting better if their arteries are open as they get older. As long as the arteries are open, their accumulated experience makes them better. So that's why it's fun to write when you're older, because you've accumulated a lot of knowledge. Okay. And Ayn Rand, man, I'm telling you, her book, The Romantic Manifesto, is a masterpiece about culture, creativity, and literature. She really paid the price, and she really studied that literature. She wanted to be a great writer, and she was a magnificent writer, okay? And look at the things she would say. The three great ages of art and literature were the ancient Greeks, the Renaissance, and the 1800s. Victor Hugo is the greatest novelist who ever lived. Upon reading his work, one feels as if they are entering a cathedral. Okay, that's why I call her a closet Christian, because I know that overtly she won't say she is. All she does is talk about how she loves all these Christian writers. Fyodor Dostoevsky is also one of the greatest novelists. To read his work is to walk into a chamber of horrors, but with a strong guide. Quo Vadis by Sienkiewicz is the greatest technical novel of all time, but I don't agree with its glorification of Christianity. She goes on, and so I think she kind of thinks that Hazel Christo was a bit of a wussy for allowing himself to be put up on a cross, but she wanted a more macho, masculine type of male hero, and that's how she liked, John Galt and stuff, and Howard Rourke and whatnot, from like Anthem and from Atlas Shrugged and whatnot. But so, anyways, I learned a lot from her, and I learned a lot also from Schopenhauer. So here's Arthur Schopenhauer, and he was sort of, again, an eccentric, crazy genius. All the geniuses are kind of eccentric and crazy. If you have a problem with that, you'll never get to study geniuses, because they're all like that. Okay, and I started to read his book called The Art of Literature, and it really helped me to get a sense of what is good, what really matters. A great writer writes the quintessence only, nothing the reader would think for himself. Too many words to communicate a few thoughts is the unmistakable sign of mediocrity. To gather much thought into a few words stamps the man of genius. Okay, so I took that to heart, and I said to myself, you know what? Whenever I write anything, if I send an email, I'm always going to try to make it concise. I want to always write in a way that is good. For example, I make tons of medical notes and medical reports. Whenever I write my medical notes, even my dictation of a brain MRI, I structure it in a way that will be as clear and easy as possible for the person to read it and understand it. And I do that on purpose, because I said, if I'm always in the habit of doing things well and good, then I'll automatically do them that way. The first couple of times you do that, maybe for a couple of months, you're going to be a little slower and more awkward. And there's a lot of things that all go into it, and they all add together, like Dave Schultz's Incrementalism. For example, I always try to write in a form of embodied simulation. So embodied simulation means that in our mind's eye, when somebody first begins to say a sentence or we read a sentence, we see a concrete subject, and it could be like a dog, okay? And as soon as you hear the word dog, your brain calls to mind, to the forefront, everything related to dogs. Dogs bark, they chase cats, they go bow wow, etc. And then the sentence continues. The dog chased the cat. That's very easy to read and understand. It's active voice, and you have an embodied simulation, concrete subject through which you can picture the coming events, and you're ready for them. Okay, so, and like if you're talking about, let's say, a radiology report, if let's say I'm talking about the liver, if I were to say there is no evidence of a tumor in the liver, you have no idea what I'm talking about until I say liver. Okay. On the other hand, if I say liver with no evidence of neoplasm, you immediately know liver, just like I had earlier said dog, and you can anticipate all the potential diseases in the liver. And what I'm trying to say is, you simply try, whenever you write, whenever you talk, from emails to everything you do, your job-related writing, always try to make it good. Always try to incorporate active voice, embodied simulation. I learned, like, for example, when I make a radiology report, I use all these semicolons to string together the subtle nuance when I'm describing a tumor or an infection or whatever it is. And then it just becomes it becomes automatic, okay? I'm just used to doing this all the time, so I can automatically make a beautiful report. I've had lots of people tell me my reports are the most beautiful thing they've ever seen in medicine, that they said, if we want to understand the brain and how to understand brain MRI and CT, we just read your reports, okay? They're as clear as it could be. And I like that. I mean, I don't get 5 cents for that. Other people will say, why do you waste time? We just got to get the work done so we can go home. And there's truth in that too. But what I'm saying is, it's like Aristotle said, if you try to strive for excellence, always excellence becomes automatic for you, and you just make things good out of habit. Okay, I kind of had the mind's eye that, like, the doctor comes along the next day and sees all my reports, I want them to say, these are all good, these are great, these are the best I've ever seen. And if I strive towards that, I make progress towards that. And I've had a lot of people tell me that. Let's see. Only he who writes entirely for the sake of what he has to say, this is Schopenhauer again, writes anything worth writing. The greatest works of the greatest men, they all belong to a time when they wrote them for nothing or for a very small amount. Okay. And that's like, look at like Don Quixote, Miguel Cervantes. He got nothing for Don Quixote, which is considered by many people one of the greatest, if not the greatest books of all time. And it was the first novel. Okay. And that's pretty typical. Boethius, The Consolation of Philosophy, written before he was executed. A lot of books are like that. They write them simply because they really have something to say. The best writers are those who've thought before they started writing. They are rare. He who writes for fools will always find a large audience. It only takes a few pages to see the author's skill and intention. If the author does not quickly display some valuable information and only seems to be writing to fill up the page with words, then quickly throw the book into the garbage because time is too valuable to waste. A great writer writes because he has something to say. He doesn't write for fame or for money because he knows he will not get any. He writes for great men and for posterity because too few of his contemporaries will be able to follow his thoughts. He is like a man who knows the correct time, but it is of no use to him because everyone else is using a different clock. He plans his book like an architect plans a building. He really has thought about the topic. He has conversed about the topic. He writes about his own thoughts and his own experience. He expresses in a fresh and forcible way. Simplicity has always been the mark of truth, and it is also a mark of genius. The object of science is to recognize the many in the one, to perceive the rules in any given example, and not to go on counting up examples ad infinitum. Since similes and metaphors are such a powerful engine of knowledge, it is a sign of great intelligence in a writer if his similes are unusual and at the same time to the point. And a book is doubly good if it is short. Okay, so this is all the kind of advice Schopenhauer gives. It's magnificent, okay, and he's exactly right about all this stuff. I don't know how much time I have to go on with all this stuff, but this is really what it's about for creating magnificent writing.
Yeah, little Mark, go ahead.
Okay, true excellence can be attained only where the work has been produced for its sake alone. The truth is that the hobbyist treats his subject as an end, whereas the professional treats it merely as a means. The hobbyist is really in earnest about the matter and has a direct interest because he pursues it. He likes it. He pursues it con amore. It is these hobbyists and not the professional hirelings that have always done the greatest work. And that's what I noticed too. I'm like, all these textbooks, they suck. They're just written because the professor's kind of obligated. And the professor doesn't even really write them usually. What happens is the publishing company goes to the famous professor and says, hey, can you write a textbook on pathology, pathophysiology? And the guy's like, well, I'm really busy. I don't get promoted for these books. They go, well, it'll help your reputation and your fame. And the guy's like, okay, I can do it. And then he goes back to his fellowship program and he tells his fellows, he goes, look, guys, they need a letter, the fellows, to get their job. So they have to do whatever the boss of the fellowship program says. So he says, write this book. Because I have a bunch of friends, and I had the same experience when I was in training, that they'll ask them to write the book. So these textbooks are typically written by junior fellows who just copy the old edition, okay? They don't really know anything. They don't really care. It's just an obligation imposed on them because it's rather amazing how bad the textbooks stink, and that's why they stink. And then here Schopenhauer continues, the intellectual attainments of a man who thinks for himself, they resemble a fine painting where the light and the shade are correct, the tone sustained, the color perfectly harmonized. It is true to life. On the other hand, the intellectual attainments of the mere man of learning, the professor, they're like a large palette full of all sorts of colors, which are at most systematically arranged, but they're devoid of harmony, of connection and meaning. To think with one's own head is to aim at developing a coherent whole, a system, even though it is not strictly a complete one. Okay, and that's absolutely true. But then you're also, I'm saying this, what gave me the confidence? Why am I confident I can go into any medical field and write a better book than any of the internal medicine or internal medicine subspecialty doctors? And the reason is because I have this deep knowledge of multiple fields and how it all connects and relates. And I know that they have this narrow-minded conformist training that basically says, the only possible way to help these patients is drugs, and nobody understands the causes of any of this stuff. And so because they can do tenure fellowship in whatever it is, endocrinology, cardiology, whatever, and I know that their knowledge is a joke, okay, because I've got this big perspective of stuff that matters. If you don't know nutrition, epidemiology, and toxicology, you really can't be good at treating internal medicine diseases because almost all of them are dietary diseases. It's just a fact. Okay, but that explains it. That explains why, the head of Harvard internal medicine really is a joke, a clown, if you will, compared to a health coach who studied nutrition for just a month. It's a fact. And then the head of Harvard, he can't change. The head of any Ivy League school, they can't change their tune because if they change their tune, Big Pharma will be pissed off at them. They won't get their grant money. Their department will lose money and they'll get bumped out of their position. So basically, they're obligated to BS the public. And that's why it can't be fixed the way it currently is. Nobody keeps track of outcomes. Patients think, I go to the doctor to try to get better. No, the doctor don't care if you get better. The doctor has to quickly give you the standard of care, which is usually a drug for most chronic stuff, and then get you out of his room, get his billing code. He's expected by some beankeeper to see 30 patients that day, okay? That's just how it works. And so again, unless you center it on, let us do what is best for the individual. Could you imagine, if parents handled their children the way the conventional medical system handles patients? No kid would make it, okay? You need that love to make things work. You just do. And anybody who thinks you don't is kidding themselves. Okay. Let's see. The really scientific thinker, although he has need of much knowledge and so must read a great deal, his mind is strong enough to master it all, to assimilate it, to incorporate it with the system of his thoughts, and to make it fit with the organic unity of his insight, which is, though vast, is always growing. The thinker stands in the same relation to the book philosopher as an eyewitness does to the historian. The thinker speaks from direct knowledge of his own. The thinker is like the man who has traveled to the other place and lived there for some time, whereas the book scholar is more like the person who's only read travel guides about the other place. The man who thinks for himself can easily be distinguished from the book philosopher by the way he talks, by his marked earnestness, and by the originality, the directness, and the personal conviction that stamp all his thoughts and expression. The book philosopher lets it be seen that everything he has is secondhand. The works of all truly capable minds are distinguished by a character of decision and definiteness, which means that they are clear. A truly capable mind always knows what it wants to express. The characteristic sign of a mind of the highest order is that it always judges at first hand. Yeah, when you studied a subject well, you should trust your own judgment better than that of others. Once you know the subject well, and that's a sign of people who are true experts, okay? All right, so this is more of the same type of stuff. It's great stuff by Schopenhauer. Let's see. Oh, and then, yeah, this is all stuff we talked about. A little bit, one last quote. A novel will be of high and noble order the more it represents the inner and the less it represents the outer life. Skill consists in setting the inner life in motion with the smallest possible array of circumstance. And with the ratio between the two, it provides a means of judging any novel of whatever kind. For this inner life, it is that which really excites our interest. The business of the novelist is not to create great events, but to make small ones interesting. Tristram Shandy has indeed as good as no action at all, and there is not much in La Nouvelle Heloise and Abelard by Rousseau, or in Wilhelm Meister. Even Don Quixote has relatively little, and what there is very unimportant. It is merely for the sake of fun. And these are the 4 best novels of all time. Okay, so that's what I'm getting at here with Schopenhauer, is he's saying that it's the interior feeling about the thoughts of the character and how we can relate to them and identify them, and their thoughts kind of become like our thoughts. We perceive ourselves in the protagonist character. That's what makes a book great. Versus look at all the modern stuff. Look at the modern movies. They all stink. They're a bunch of sound effects and special effects. They're loud and noisy and vulgar. They're for retards, okay? Versus a really good story, book, or novel is something like Amadeus, or like The Agony and the Ecstasy with Michelangelo and Pope Julius. Like, Jimmy Stewart movies, okay? All right, so exile writers often write the best books, okay? Exile writers, all these guys, they went through these difficult times, and it gave them the ability to have an objective perspective. When a person is outside the mainstream, they can often see things better. So this is just lists of famous authors who had times of exile, okay? And they wrote magnificent books. And I like this painting here. This is what it's like to be a low-fat vegan, okay? The high-fat vegans, the ones selling everybody the BS, omega-3s, supplements, olive oil, all this other nonsense, 8 cups of water a day. They're in the middle of all the attention. They get the crowds, et cetera, et cetera. If you tell them the truth, not that many people really want to hear what you have to say, but in your own heart of hearts, you feel, at peace with yourself. I did right, like my mother. I promised my mom I would try to be a great doctor or scientist, and I'm doing it, okay? I just do this as a hobby. I don't make any money with this nutrition and health stuff. I make money in conventional medicine. I wish I could have a career doing this. I could help more people, but there's just not much of a market for it, unfortunately, but I'll still do it because it's the right thing. It makes me feel good. Okay. My wife kind of thinks it's a joke, but she's actually glad at least I'm home. You know what I mean? I'm not out at the racetrack. I'm not gambling. I'm not throwing my money in the garbage can. I let her throw it in the garbage can. Okay. good quote here from Evelyn Waugh, because I read all this stuff. I read tons of stuff about the biographies of writers and stuff. The world has a choice between Christianity and chaos. Europe came into being through Christianity. Without Christianity, Europe has no significance and no power to command allegiance. And so what I'm saying is religion means relegare, legare, to ligate, to tie together a people, of a value system, a philosophical system. And what I see happen is man has allowed himself to drift into atheistic Darwinism. The rulers basically perceive them as being like farm animals. And I don't know how much time we have, but this book is magnificent. Ayn Rand and the Romantic Manifesto. And she goes through all this stuff, and she talks about the psychology that generates the great art. And she even says this about Victor Hugo. The distance between Victor Hugo's world and ours is astonishingly short. He died in 1885, but the distance between his universe and ours has to be measured in aesthetic light years. I love that, aesthetic light years. He is virtually unknown to the American public, except for some vandalized remnants on our movie screens. His works are seldom discussed in our literary courses in universities. He is invisible to the neo-barbarians of our age. Modern readers, particularly the young, should be cautioned that a first encounter with Hugo might be shocking to them. It is like emerging from a murky underground filled with the moans of festering half corpses into the blinding burst of sunlight. Talk about a metaphor for Plato's cave. There it is. And it's true. I'm telling you, I studied art in the 1800s. It's magnificent. The best novels ever written. They all came out of the 1800s. Well, 4 of the top best ones. Christmas Carol is the best. Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky. Number 3, I would say Les Miserables, Victor Hugo. Number 4, Quo Vadis by Sienkiewicz. There it is. Okay. So much incredible stuff came out of the 1800s. Anatomy of a Joke. All right. A good joke is basically you've got a setup line, the first one going through a predictable path, and then it diverts in the second path. There's an unexpected double meaning of the keyword, and that gives you a surprise, and that's why it's funny, because there's a surprise. That's the anatomy of a joke. Okay, I don't want to take too much time. People like pictures better than words, so try to have as many picture slides as you can. Oh, I learned this trick from Johnny Harris. He's a video maker. He would show a map first to the audience to orientate them to the geography when you're talking about epidemiology, then show the people. So once they're orientated, then show the people. So you learn a lot of tricks, and you just add them all together, and then they all come together. And, you have fun with a lot of quotes. Scientists love their models as much as artists do. Okay, this is the great Pygmalion and Galatea there. For optimal performance, you got to get yourself in the zone. You need enough stress to be energized, not so much that you're distracted and anxious, not so little that you don't have energy. So what I would always do is I would envision myself doing something good and beautiful, and that would energize me, And like I said, my mom is the most important person to me in the world, and I feel like I have honored my promise to her. Another thing that energizes you, before I have to do something energetic, I'll drink 32 ounces of beet juice, and I'll chase it down with about 10 ounces of water. And I know this really energizes me. I do this before I do high repetition squats, when I'm going for my personal best in weightlifting, but also if I have to, sometimes I give long lectures, 2 hours, 3 hours. I'll do this. Sometimes I'm super busy at work and I got to do tons and tons of cases I got to read, or do a bunch of procedures. This will energize me when I need that energy. And the one thing you have to remember when you're on your path to trying to do eventual creative work is, at first, it starts out as exciting and fun when you look at a new subject that you want to become good at. But then you have to go through years of a tedious grind where you plateau in your progress, and that's kind of frustrating. But eventually, you'll start hitting the point where you've accumulated enough critical mass, if you will, that you can do original creative work, and now that's a lot of fun. But you're going to have to pay your dues for this segment. That's why I mean, like Goethe's quote, in order for a man to master a complex topic, he must love it, because you have to be able to push yourself through this. And then you also have to be nonconformist to say, I will go into the unknown. I will take a chance at refuting conventional doctrine, because that's how you can come up with new discoveries. Okay, whereas you're rewarded for this path. Keep your mouth shut. You work on the assembly line of medicine. Next. And the faster you can push the cows through the system, the more money you make. Okay, that's just how it works. Okay, and then here's the hero's journey, the way, you'll have an initial setback, like those turning points I talked about, and then you start making progress. But you have to accept the fact with progress, you don't just walk up a hill. You take 2 steps up, smack down, 2 steps up, smack back down, 2 steps up, smack back down. And you have to accept the fact you're going to get smacked down, especially the better you get, the more creative you get, the more advanced you get, the more people are going to hate you and block you. So you have to say, I will do what is right. You have to be like St. Augustine said. He said, wrong is wrong, even if everybody's doing it. Right is right, even if no one is doing it. Okay. I will serve the Lord. I will do what is right. I don't give a rat's ass. You have to have that attitude, or you just can't pass through all the blockages that are going to be thrown in your path. That's why a creative artist who has a sense of this is my destiny, they have a better chance of success because they're willing to bounce back from all the inevitable setbacks. Oh, and I joke, like, here's my typical lecture. I call it, I start out with easy, practical knowledge for everybody in the audience, and then I hit a couple cool observations for the aficionados, if you will. And then I'll hit an AO, academic orgasms, like awesome connections that, people that really like the subject will think that's wonderful. People who barely know it, they won't understand. It'll be too much for them. But then I'll come back down to practical knowledge. And I think that's a good way to give a talk. So you give the useful information to the general audience that doesn't know the subject at all. You hit connections for the advanced audience, and you hit the AOs for the aficionados who wanted to get some new information. And yeah, this was just, I said, I love the painting of Thomas Aquinas, and I love Thomas Aquinas. Some of my great heroes are Aristotle. He classified all the knowledge of the known time of the world when he was young. I love Cicero for his eloquence. I love Aquinas for unifying faith and reason, and Aristotle and the Catholic Church showing that they go together. And I know they go together. It was Aquinas and scholasticism that led to the Renaissance and much of the great universities and thinking that's gone on since that time. And so this is one painting where he sort of envisioned himself before Hazel Christ, and he said, I'm trying, but it's so difficult. I don't know if I'm really accomplishing anything useful or good. And Hazel Christ said to him in his vision, you're doing good. Just hang in there. Keep going. You're doing good. Okay, so I love that. I have that painting of that in my bathroom. And then another point I make, like, here's a word slide on fiber. Yeah, it's nice. The color coding of the words helps, but when you see a picture, it's so much nicer to have a picture. So whenever possible, if you're writing a book or if you're giving a talk, try to get some pictures in there. Our mind's just designed to look at pictures. So humans just love pictures. I love this painting too, Sadak in Search of the Waters of Forgetting. And what this is all about is, it reminds me of Prometheus. He has to climb all the way up to the mountain. And this is what it's like to learn a new subject. And you just have to go through it. You're at the bottom. It's painful. It's difficult. It's time consuming. And you just have to say, I know I want to get there. So you just have to keep pushing through everything, and you have to be committed to it, and you have to simplify your life. I've seen that in great athletes. The guys who went on to become world champions, a lot of time they were the simplest person in the world, like John Smith, for example, like Mark Schultz. He said, all I want to do at this time in my life is improve my skill as a wrestler. And they would do nothing except focus on wrestling practically, but they were awesome. I know those guys. I know them personally. I've seen them, and it was awesome to see what they did. But that idea of simplify your life, that's what I did when I was writing my books. Nothing else really mattered in my life other than what I absolutely had to do. My job, I just crank through, do a good job, go home, get to work on my book project. Okay. And here's one speech I love from, well, I don't know if we got time. Do I got time for a Ruskin speech?
One more, yeah.
Okay. This is the greatest art criticism speech ever of John Ruskin. And John Ruskin's another crazy, pathetic genius. He was a genius. He was a good man. He devoted his life to doing good things for people and for art. But yeah, was he a little crazy in his personal life? Yeah, he was kind of sad and pathetic. But here's his greatest speech, greatest art speech ever. And this is from 1853. The binary opposition speech of the pre-Raphaelites. Pre-Raphaelites were a group of artists who wanted to go back before Raphael. They felt Raphael emphasized too much the beauty of artistic technique and not enough of the religious feeling. Okay, so here's the speech. There have been 3 ages in painting: the classical period ending with the fall of Rome, the medieval period extending to Raphael, and following Raphael is the modern era. The classicism art was pagan. Medieval art was Christian. Modern art denies Christ. All ancient art was religious. All modern art is profane. The ancient art was moral. The modern art is immoral. In medieval art, truth is first and beauty second. In modern art, beauty is first and truth is second. All ancient and medieval art was religious. All modern art is profane. This distinction is as firm as light and darkness. He who offers God a second place offers him no place. Raphael on one Vatican wall wrote that the kingdom of theology is presided over by Christ. And on the other wall, he wrote that the kingdom of poetry was presided over by Apollo. Okay, so here is the School of Athens, but he's referring to this painting of Mount Parnassus with all the poets. And then on this other painting across from it is going to be like this communion religious painting. And so what Ruskin is saying is that Raphael has put the poets as equivalent to the theologians. In his opinion, that's a disgraceful, disrespectful thing. Okay. And the binary opposition of it just makes everything so dramatic. Okay, so let me just finish it up here. And from that spot and that hour, the intellect and the art of Italy date their degradation. Raphael elevated the creations of fancy to the same rank as the objects of faith on the other. And the doom of the arts of Europe went forth from that chamber. The medieval principles that led up to Raphael. The medieval principles led up to Raphael, and the modern principles lead down from him. Just as classical art was great in building to its gods, and medieval art was great in building to its god, modern art is not great because it builds to no god. Okay, so kind of drama, but it's great. Okay, and of course we talked about this. Mankind's either created an image of God, or he's just a talking primate, a talking monkey. Creating the image of God, he's got a lot of rights. A talking primate has 0 rights. Okay, and I hope things aren't headed towards this. And then, I've talked about this before, how Martin Luther, there's the magic bathroom with all the books. I had some pictures in there. Esselstyn was on this wall. My comedian, I love Rodney Dangerfield. I thought he was really funny. Victor Hugo, and a whole bunch of them, some Greek writers and stuff. Here's just another look at the magic bathroom. This is at my old house. In the new house, I got another version of the magic bathroom, just newer topics that I'm studying. I always have a portable table, textbook typically right here, some type of paperback. I'll often walk around when I'm reading, because if I get tired or spacey, like I come home from work, I want to get a quick exercise, I'll walk in circles and I'll read something. Or I notice if I'm feeling sleepy when I'm reading a book, I'm starting to space out. If I get up and walk, when you walk, you're smarter. So just like I was saying earlier, a lot of good thinking come from walking. These are just a bunch of study skill techniques. I've written several books on study skills. This is a little bit like what the modern world finds itself in. Are we either going to try to be nice to each other and come up with a workable system of values, or are we just going to go for atheistic Darwinism, might is right, and bring back slavery? So we either turn our attitude around like Scrooge turned his life around and everybody was happy, or we're going to head down this path like France in the 1790s. Hopefully we'll choose this path. I don't know what's going to happen, but you need that biblical foundation of man created in the image of God. Otherwise you got nothing. You're just talking monkeys. So, is good going to win out over evil? I don't know. I hope so. We're headed into what's called the great what set. Okay. And that's not good. That's a diminishment of the enjoyability of life and the population numbers versus, are we going to make things better again? I love this song. The singer's name is Kennedy Anderson. She sings a song, "I Will Serve the Lord." And that's my feeling. As long as I'm alive, I will try to help the proles, try to live a good life, try to create good things. And hope that was helpful.
Dr. Rogers, thanks. That was a great presentation, very wide-reaching panorama. Let me see if I can summarize at least some of this. Success is about having passion and the desire to succeed. This makes you be better. It creates motivation. You talked about the importance of the growth mindset. Why not me? And the power of belief. Incrementalism, collecting information. You showed us your sports house with tennis, basketball, and weightlifting courts, and then your wife's house. How modern day schools are something of a joke, which I would agree with. And then you wrote the book on studying and how to learn. You were told your writing sucks, so you taught yourself how to write by reading and reading about writing, taking your failures, putting them into something new in writing. Let's see, your books. You have books on writing, on quotes, on raising your IQ. You've got dog piss leaking down onto your books from in the basement. Two toes and a hot tub, you said, was one of your better, more entertaining. Copernicus, be a healer, not a dealer. Atheism versus religion. Universities can be and often are corrupt and pursuing only money, and then all the social Darwinism stuff you're talking about. Charles Dickens, one of my favorites. And I like the quote, "Poets are more important than historians." Vedshore says the Vatican. That was unexpected. But anyhow, what a story. A lot of little gems in there. Simplicity is the mark of genius. That was another one that I remember was good. Peter, thank you very much. We'll do this again. And to everyone watching, thank you for making it this far. Please give it a like, share it, and we'll see you on the next one.